distinguished panel with us here on stage. I'm going to request our Deputy Chairman Salmanji in a moment to take over and introduce his colleagues and then get into that session. But before we do, I just wanted to update you on what to expect for today. We have this eminent panel, what Indian policymakers can do about jobless growth. Followed by that, we have a panel with the AIPC state presidents that is being moderated by our RC East and regional operations officers. Followed by that, we have a panel rethinking rural economies to truly sustainable communities with Honorable T.S. Singhdeo Minister, Honorable Mohammad Akbarji Minister, Chandan Yadavji, Vinod Vermaji, moderated by Rajiv Aroraji. We then have lunch. During lunch, we will have a photo opportunity for all states. We will do that photo opportunity over here. The ROs will brief you on how to do that. Once we finish with that, we will have our 2 zonal events, followed by which we will be doing a concluding note. Do note, ladies and gentlemen, that the All India Professionals Congress today will be adopting a very important resolution. It is very, very important that as many of you as can be here, given your flight schedules, are here for the adoption of that resolution. It will be on behalf of the entire AIPC. Without further ado, once again, welcome. We will now play the national song. Yes.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sujalam Suphala, Malayaj Sheetala, Sasya Shyamala Mataram, Vande Mataram. Shubha Josna Pulakitayamini Pullakusumita Drumadana Shobhini Suhasini Sumadhura Bhashini Sukhadam Varanam Mataram Vande Mataram Vande Mataram.
Please remain standing for the Chhattisgarh state song.
जय हो छत्तीसगढ़ मैया, सो है बिंदिया सभी घाटे डोंगरी पहाड़, चंदा सूरज बने तोर नैना, सुबह धानी के संग रुगलक हरियाण रंग तोरे बोली जैसे सुखर मैना, अजरा तोरे डोलाए पूरे भैया, महू पावर करो तोरे भैया। जय हो छत्तीसगढ़ मैया।
Thank you very much. Deputy Chairman, over to you.
Thank you, Alan. So we'll get right into it, but quick introductions. Dr. Rajan doesn't need any introduction. He's already been introduced, and we all know that he's one of the world's foremost economists. Thank you, Dr. Rajan, for making time for us again. You just came yesterday morning, and you're going to leave tonight for the US. So we are very grateful. Yamini Iyer is the President and Chief Executive officer of the Center for Policy Research, which is India's, I would say, foremost policy think tank. She founded in 2008 the Accountability Initiative at CPR, which is credited with pioneering one of India's largest expenditure tracking surveys for elementary education. Yamini writes frequently in major newspapers, and I hope you read her because it's excellent. I learn a lot, and you will too. Rajiv Gowda also needs no introduction since he's part of our family. But a slight introduction so that you get a sense of who Rajiv really is. Now, Rajiv is obviously head of our research department. He's a former member of parliament of the Rajya Sabha. He's a national spokesperson of the Indian National Congress. He, like I said, serves as the chairman of the Congress Research Department. And Rajiv, I can tell you that a lot of people here could contribute to your department, and we should talk about that. And he was professor of economics and social sciences and the chairperson of the Center for Public Policy at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. So, with introductions out of the way, let's get to the topic being jobless growth and ultimately what to do about it. Dr. Rajan, just to get everyone on the same page, if you could share with the audience this your sense of the concept of jobless growth, and is this a uniquely Indian phenomenon, or do you see similar things elsewhere, or is India a more pronounced case? You'll need.
Yeah, I think you've given me a tremendous, enormous task. Let me be as simple as I can on this. I mean, the reality is that India is not creating enough jobs. It's obvious from reading the papers when you look at the enormous number of applications for any kind of safe job, such as government jobs. The numbers that are bandied around. Yesterday, I gave a number, 12.5 million applying for 35,000 railway jobs. That too not high quality. And also, you have the fact that people with PhDs are applying for jobs as chaprasis or peons or etc. So their qualifications are not being used. That either means the qualifications are not strong, or that we are not creating the jobs that can take advantage of those qualifications. I think there's a little bit of both at work. At the same time, I think perhaps the biggest element of this tragedy is that we are underutilizing our women tremendously. The female workforce participation is so low relative to other countries. Of course, that doesn't mean women don't work. They're working very hard at home, etc. But the real question is, do they have enough choice in the kinds of work that are available to them, or are they perforce restricted to a certain set of jobs, and we're not fully utilizing their talents? So these are all various aspects of the fact that there are not enough jobs, and low participation rates are clearly one indicator, including amongst men. The numbers, again, depends on what frame, but 40% is what it is approximately. And the labor force participation in the US is approximately 62%. That is of the working age population, how many people are actually working or looking for work. So that's in an advanced country. In an emerging market, you should have pretty strong participation because there must be, because of strong growth, a tremendous number of jobs. And the reality is, therefore, that growth is fairly jobless. Now, it does mean also, when you think about that jobless growth, that the people who are not getting jobs are being sort of employed somewhere else. And so we also have the problem of overemployment in certain areas. And you can see that sometimes doesn't add to productivity, it actually subtracts. When you have 5 people in a small kirana shop trying to look after the needs of the customer, but you really can't do that effectively in that small workspace, then they're getting into each other's way. So we need to create more jobs. That's the bottom line. But the growth that we have has to be more job intensive. Now, what does that mean in terms of policy? I'll leave it to the others.
Before I get to the others, just want to get your insights on one thing. There may be people in India who feel that unemployment rate in India is maybe 7 or 8%, and that's not that high compared to, say, Europe. They'll say unemployment rate is not that high, although by Indian standards, that's, it has a decadal, I guess 4 or 5 decades high. What is the relationship between the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate, which is clearly low? Because many people don't fully understand that link.
Well, I think that is the key point, right? The labor force participation rate includes those with jobs as well as those who are looking for employment. So if that is relatively low, that is suggesting a large part of the population is not even looking for jobs. And so you have to ask the question, why? Do they have independent sources of wealth, or are they so discouraged that they don't even bother? Now, some of them, may be in the process of preparing. Now, I don't know, and this maybe other experts on the panel can tell us, whether people who are, for example, preparing for the IAS, do they count as part of the labor force participation, or are they out of it? Because there is not an insignificant number. I don't think it's a big number, but it's not an insignificant number that keeps giving exam after exam for government services until they superannuate from being able to give exams. Then they enter the work, they actually start looking for other kinds of work. How are they counted, for example? But put that aside, 40% is really, really low as part of the labor force. And so that, to my mind, is suggesting that our jobs problem is huge and not reflective of the 7% unemployment, which is just what it is in Europe.
And just to put this in perspective, if India had to reach the global average for employment, we would need an additional 180 million jobs today, not in a few years. So we have a deficit of about 180 million jobs compared if we were at a global average level. Now, Yamini, I say this to everyone, that when it comes to social sciences, you're one of the best in India. Please explain to us, why is labor force participation rate so low for women? Because that of course it's low for men too, but female labor force participation rates have gone below those in countries like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Bangladesh. What's going on?
Thanks, Salman. Thanks. Thank you. And with that generous introduction, now I'm feeling humbled because I'm not sure that I'll be able to live up to the expectations you set for me. But let me try and answer this in the following way. I think before we come to the specific issue of female labor force participation, we need to look at labor force participation more broadly, because women are participating in an economy in which men participate in too, and that has huge bearing on what is available and how they respond. So here, just a few things. Two big puzzles and then a third one. The first big puzzle for me, if you think about the structural transformation of the Indian economy, is that to some degree we skipped manufacturing even in the peak growth years, although construction certainly provided a lot of jobs, and we'll come to that in a second. We went straight to services on the back of a demographic structure where in that same period, on average, about 50% of children that finished 5 years of schooling could barely read a standard 2 text. So this tells you something very important about what's going on in the Indian economy. It was all of us who've had the luxury of elite education, in which the bulk of India was sort of gaining its global positioning, performed well, and were able to build very effectively on the service economy. Of course, that had significant trickle down, and we did see the largest shift out of poverty in that phase too. But really, the bulk of wealth was being created in services at the same time as which the education was being massified, which is an important shift that took place in the 90s and 2000s, but massified in a way where 50% of children in standard 5 could barely read a standard 2 textbook. So are we creating a demography that is actually skilled and capable to participate in those parts of the economy which have the greatest strength? Puzzle number one. Puzzle number 2, the bulk of jobs that we create, or because after all, as we just discussed, the distinction between unemployment and labor force participation, it's not that the average Indian isn't working. Given the state of our economy, everyone in India is working. The question is, where are they working and are they looking for certain kinds of jobs? So the bulk of jobs that we created outside of agriculture and services was in the construction industry, especially in the 2000s through to 2010-12 phase, in the peak years. These are precarious, informal jobs. These are jobs which took people off farm, so out of subsistence farming, into the economy, the non-farm economy, but not in ways that ensured that there would be any kind of job security. Now, there were two challenges with this. There is a precariousness to it, which means that today I'll have a job and tomorrow I'll go out of it. And if you look closely at CMIE data, which gives you the current picture because it only started in 2014, and for all its problems, it's high frequency. So you get a sense of how precarious it is even today, which is you'll have a job for a week, it'll go away soon, then you look again, right? This means that you need to keep your farm. That 1 acre farm is the only sponge and the primary form of security that you have. And we saw this during lockdown, which is why large amounts of these precarious workers that came into the cities, mostly for construction and other small petty wage earners, moved back to villages and went straight back into subsistence farming. And if you look at even the government's periodic labor force survey data, you will see when the economy started looking precarious pre the lockdown 2019-20, before March 2020, agriculture was once again the biggest source of employment and continued to be the biggest source of employment in the 2 years of the lockdown. So in this precarity, what happens is that you can't actually enhance productivity of agriculture. So here we are as an economy that on the one hand has a globally competitive service economy, still has agriculture as the largest employer, and cannot enhance agricultural productivity because I believe there's a vicious cycle locked in because of the informality of jobs and the lack of job security that we have. And the last puzzle, which is related, the bulk of formal employment, if you look at economies around the world, economies evolve, they transform structurally away from agriculture into formal employment. And through that process, you get urbanization. That means that you're basically looking at encouraging workers to move from the farm into the cities. Indian economic labor markets make it extremely hard, and the nature of the precarity of our cities make it really hard for people to move. Now, we don't have good data because the census data we have from 2011, we don't have a census right now. There is a new survey that the government did for the PLFS, which has just come out, so we're still diving into it, but that's not necessarily fully representative. It's a sample survey. It'll give us some indications. But we have a large amount of circular migration, but it's not large enough for the nature of the Indian economy. And the complete divergence that we see between where southern and western states are and where northern and eastern states are, you would expect a lot more movement and a lot more long-term movement. Now, I'm saying all of this to come to your point of female labor force participation. Given the fact that we have a demographic dividend, but a demographic dividend that has not been built in, not skilling our society enough for the kinds of jobs that we are creating in the services. Given the precariety of jobs in the informal sector and the centrality of the small farm, and given the difficulties of mobility, it is not surprising that as the economy starts doing relatively better, it's moving away from deep distress into the second level. So the World Bank has this number of about 50% of India sits in that vulnerable section, right? So one income shock away from falling back into poverty. At that point, you're making choices not of distress employment, but of employment that gives you a leg up. And if you can't create jobs that are stable jobs, that give you incomes that are of a certain quality, then certain household choices are going to be made. And I think that's the reason. So surveys that our colleagues have done that give us a sense of why women are not looking for jobs, especially in the 25 to 30 age group and further. Well, with women, you should look at 18 to 25 because 25 plus you get marriage and children, and there's another set of cultural factors that come into play. But transportation and access to quality jobs is the biggest hurdle to women looking for jobs in urban areas. In rural areas, labor force participation for women is looking just marginally better because the economy is doing badly and everyone's gone back to farm, and farm employs women. So these are the challenges. I think the biggest issue with female labor force participation today is, are we creating jobs, or do we have an imagination that can create jobs that are accessible for women, which will encourage women to participate? And I think the answer for that is no, in a very precarious labor structure.
This reminds me of the early 2000s when there was a lot of distress in the economy, and we suddenly saw women, old people, everybody trying to go and work in the farm sector. Now, before I get to solutions, let's take Rajiv's. Rajiv, what is your critique? In some ways, if you think about jobless growth in India, if you think about the so-called employment problem in India, it's not necessarily, we haven't seen it only in this government's rule. It's been going on for some time. What do you think has happened in the last few years? Do you have a case which says, look, these kinds of factors are making things worse, or do you think that nothing has changed?
No, it's been surprising. During the UPA years, we were facing jobless growth, and now we are actually facing job loss growth, right? There are actually about 500,000 jobs that have been lost in the last few years. And, and that is surprising because growth continues to happen. So what is changing? Is it, is investment more capital intensive, as a result of which people aren't hiring enough? I think one of the big differences in the last few years is the impact of demonetization and GST on small businesses. Small businesses, micro, small, medium enterprises hire a lot of people, many more. They're very much more labor intensive compared to larger businesses. And as a result, if these are being driven to extinction in some ways, you will see a lot more people losing jobs, right? And that has been happening. Demonetization certainly had that impact. And GST also, when bigger players choose to take their supplies in from formal entities who can give them an e-way slip or whatever, they will stop purchasing from the more informal MSME sector. So as a result, that's been one factor that has really had a devastating impact. So really, how do you turn that around? One is to focus on micro, small, medium enterprises. Focus on what is, in the Congress manifesto of 2019, we were all part of that. We brought in a term called mass entrepreneurship. Okay, this is something that there's an organization called GAME. Ravi Venkateshan and Madan Padki and others from my city are focused on that, which is to say, can we, fill that gap? Can we help people by equipping them to become entrepreneurs? A lot of people would want to be. Somebody may, there are numerous service sector possibilities, various kinds of shops and services. But most people, one, don't have the training and exposure, and second, have never run a business. They don't have a concept or a clue on exactly what it would take, right? So there's a lot of mentoring, a lot of training that would be necessary. But if you can make that happen, then suddenly these would all be MSMEs of different kinds. And then if you can also extend that to the manufacturing, supply chain, then you will have a very different farm to city migration and career possibilities for the migrants. So basically, if you were to ask, I would say that's the one thing that I can pinpoint. One is the MSMEs going under in large numbers. And the other, I suppose, is changing nature of capital intensity in enterprises. But and that's happening even in construction, right? Okay, and if you now see the bigger projects, you will see so much more equipment there. And the same bulldozers being used for destruction, if I may make a bad joke. But the basic point is, what shall we say? So there, the simple, the seasonal migrant who comes in and helps with laying bricks or whatever they do are now being replaced by sophisticated machines. And as a result, we have a situation where jobs are being lost in that domain as well. And so it's a pleasure to welcome our Home Minister, Raoji. this thing. Yeah. So basically, that's really one of the central issues. The other is that, where you would have thought that the private sector would have created more jobs because it's growing as well, you don't see as much investment as was expected, and certainly the investment is not happening in hiring people. It is in other domains of various sorts.
Okay, so we have some interesting strands here, but before I continue, Alim, where are you? Alim will remind me when I have to stop and maybe go to the audience, okay? So somebody will tell Alim. Okay, now, Dr. Rajan, we had one strand that was about the precarious nature of employment in the informal economy. Then we had this other strand where Rajiv talked about in some way the demonetization and GST, which the government argues are for formalization of the economy. What is wrong with trying to formalize when Yamini says that this is a problem, we have precarious employment, we have informality, what is the problem? Why should we blame the government for trying to formalize? And by the way, it reminded me that my own institution, the World Bank, at one point came out with what they call as a systematic country diagnostic, in which in 2018, they mentioned demonetization only once, almost as a footnote, saying that maybe this is a good way to formalize. So what do you say?
Well, very quickly, let me say formalizing by jhatka is not the right way to do it. And I'll come back to that in a second. But let me pick up first on something that Yamini said, which is very important. That is, you cannot create strong enterprises, you cannot create growth without investing in people. And as she said, we have a top layer which is very well educated in your DPS school that you run. I went to DPS myself. So there's she went to modern, but these are all very good schools. We sort of hate each other, but in general, they're very good. But a lot of people don't get a chance to go to schools that are anywhere near as good. And so if you look at in numbers, yes, we got 100% admission into classes, but then the Asar Pratham kind of surveys say that the actual quality of education children are getting is much worse. Unless you have people graduating from these schools, forget college, even from the high schools, who have the skills that are necessary for the modern economy, including in construction, just driving those excavators takes more skills. Being a good carpenter, being a good plumber, all that in the modern economy, you can pick it up. But having an education, being able to do all the math, etc., that's necessary is important. And so I think there's no substitute for investing in our schooling, much more so. We did make a big change, as we just heard, between 1990 and 2010. But that change has to continue and make us, because everybody else is running ahead. We can't stand still. We have to move ahead for the kinds of industries that are emerging, for the kinds of jobs that are emerging. Our labor force, we keep talking about how good we are, but we're really good at the very top, not throughout. That's number one. Number two is, to Rajiv's point, can we somehow make our student population more entrepreneurial? In the following sense. Yes, we have a lot of people who go through college, but again, there are varieties and varieties of colleges, as you well understand. But even the top colleges, when the students come out, yes, from the IITs, there's been an entrepreneurial revolution. The IIMs, increasingly more people are looking to. But can more of them across the board be equipped to start small businesses? And this goes to Rajiv's point. Why do we have to have the formal process of mentorship to get them there? Can't the colleges themselves get them 3/4 of the way there? So that then the structure can take over. So, for example, shouldn't students learn a little bit of management in college? Not courses in, not the entire college in management, I think that's a waste of a brain, but maybe take a course in accounting, maybe take a course in finance, so that they know, if I want to start a business, how do I actually start a business? If I want to run a guest house, how do I run a guest house? Some basic training would be useful to prepare so that we get far more entrepreneurship. Last point, to Rajiv's point, we have to create a more friendly environment to small and medium enterprises. What we've done in the last few years is created a hostile environment, and that too suddenly. I mean, demonetization, we understand, obviously, put an emphasis on formalization. But GST, a lot of these small enterprises were getting by because they had a tax advantage. They were not paying taxes. I'm not saying that not paying taxes is a good thing. But if you want to keep them competitive, you have to give them some subsidies because they don't have the advantage of scale. Now, that doesn't mean they're terrible for the economy. They may be in places all over the country where scale is not possible, but still employment is needed.
Yes.
Not everybody can move to Mumbai or to Calcutta or to Bangalore. So the point here is that if you are taking away some of the crutches that they had and bringing them to more formal structures, what is the advantage you're giving them in formality? In fact, what you're doing is subjecting them to the disadvantages of formality, which is the Inspector Raj, the fact that the tax collectors show up at your door every. Instead, can you give them some advantages? Not so much that you want to keep them small, but enough that they start, and then they can grow out of being small because there are advantages of being formal and big. That's what we need to start thinking about.
Saman, if I can just jump in, right? I mean, India is such a large informal economy. I don't know why anyone would want to formalize everything. I mean, there's enough and more. I mean, apart from taxes and ensuring worker protections and things of that sort. But now, when you look at where the jobs are being created, the gig economy, right? Now you have delivery boys, people like that. Now, what are they missing? They are possibly not getting social security. So there's a lot of jobs being created in those kinds of sectors. In the formal, working for the Swiggies and the others who are formal enterprises, but what is their safety net? Are they getting what we are looking for in the form of, when we talk about jobs, we're talking about secure jobs with a monthly paycheck, with health insurance and retirement benefits and things like that. That's really the aspiration. And the jobs that are being created don't bring all these other elements to the table. So something's happening. People are getting some opportunity, but we're nowhere close to that ideal kind of job creation that we should be looking at.
Okay, so when Raghu started talking about education, my heart started warming, right? And I know your heart started warming. So I want you to tell us a little bit about this education part and the health part, the nutrition part. Is that relevant for for our jobs of the future? If so, are governments, especially at the state level, are they doing enough, or what can they do so that, because that's the long term, because we know things are coming down the pike. You have technology which is going to eat up a lot of unskilled jobs. So India will have a huge problem. Forget demographic dividend. We're in a different territory right now. So what can we do on that front? And then we go to Rajiv's point.
I actually sadly think we are a little bit we are a little too close to the demographic ticking time bomb. I think that ship is almost sailed, and there are some silver linings which I'll get to. Not only has that ship almost sailed, it's now it all got accelerated because we are perhaps the only country in the world that closed schools partially or fully for a full 2-year period. Okay, the only country that almost beat us, but then we beat them, was Uganda, that closed schools for 82 weeks, and then we managed to proceed to do even worse. And what really shocked me in that period, because I have 2 primary school going children, so school closures really hit home literally, was how little interest there was across the entire political stakeholder, parent, educational, every single stakeholder in opening schools. Schools were the first to close and the last to open. And now that they have finally opened, from the elite school to the village school, there's very little being done to actually address this problem. And I'll come to that later. But let's talk about silver linings. In the midst of all of this, there has been, as India went through this process of massification of the education system from the 1990s through to the early 2000s. I've been visiting rural India since the late 1990s, and anecdotally, and it shows up in data, late 1990s, early 2000s, there was a yearning for a school building. Government will come, a building will arrive, a road will come, children will go to school. By the mid to late 2000s, the building was there. The building was there, the uniforms were there, and children, including girls, most importantly, were all waking up every morning, making their way to schools. And I think that's not an achievement that we should undermine or underplay. We managed to get the school to the child and the child into the school, and we hired a whole lot of teachers. The challenge always was that in that process of moving from an elite education system to a mass education system, we had forgotten about the classroom. So we thought that the school structure, the schooling input would give you the education, but obviously, and anybody who's been inside a classroom knows this, it's about what happens between the teacher and the child inside a classroom. And here you were getting a large chunk of first generation learners without the set of expected support that many education systems around the world rely on. The big question was first acknowledging that, recognizing that you built a schooling system, but you didn't build an education, and then asking and answering the question of what is it that you want from this masses of lakhs and millions of children who are going into school once they finish 5 years. It has been a long and hard battle, but one that has somewhat been won in the form of the new education policy. In between, by the way, there was a right to education that derailed everything, but that's a different story, which very clearly says that there is an expectation that at the end of 5 years of primary schooling, children will be able to have basic foundational literacy and numeracy skills. It's part and parcel of a mission mode. By 2025, when we close schools, so perhaps we'll push it further. But there is at least a social consensus and a consensus amongst educationists. And the big shift I see, if you go across states in India, is that they have stopped obsessing classroom construction and pupil-teacher ratios and started obsessing foundational literacy and numeracy. That's a huge achievement. And if we leverage it right, we will get very far. Where we have no consensus and complete confusion is on what happens at the secondary level. So now part of that is a continuum of chain, right? So if you haven't actually got to curriculum level expectations by class 8 and you have to take the class 10 exam, you're not going to be able to take the class 10 exam unless you cheat. And that's why we have so much cheating, by the way, in our system. It's not because we are a nation of cheaters, it's because the system pushes you in that direction. We have these very high stakes exams. Virtue signaling to the labor market only comes if you have the 10th pass, 12th pass, and you haven't prepared your students. But we also don't know what to do with the mass of children that get to class 9 who may or may not be prepared enough to get a good degree, which will push them into the service economy. And we don't quite know what skills we want to give them. You'll never get an education system that gets out of high stakes exams and probably coaching centers. College counselors are a phenomenon, even amongst the elite in the US. So that is a part and parcel of how education happens at that secondary level. The question of what sets of skills, what does it mean to create vocational skills? What does it mean to create entrepreneurial skills? This is a battle that we need to have collectively and come to some kind of societal consensus like we have with primary education. And here the big policy challenge, we think of skilling as a separate thing. We are probably the only nation in the world, and Raghu will correct me if I'm wrong, which thinks about how to skill a population to participate in the labor market after they finish their graduate degrees. We create skilling centers that are not linked to universities. And we don't, in fact, at a policy level, have a skilling ministry and a higher education ministry or an education ministry that talk to each other. These are two completely separate ministries. Then there's a third one, which is the MSME, and then there's industries, and whereas actually your human capital is at the core of all of this. So we also have a policy problem, which is one of thinking about this challenge of education through skilling into the economy, into being active participants in the economy, in a very siloed approach. So we'll skill a plumber, but you may actually need to be skilling people for the gig economy. And then there's a last piece that I wanted to just add here, which is around social protection. We are more likely than not to see an economy evolve over if you take a 30-year horizon, in a servicification technology mode. That's the nature of where the jobs are going to come. That requires us to think of social protection very differently. So instead of getting, I think, caught in this bind of we need to go from rural to urban, these are two separate things. We need to go from informal to formal, these are two separate things. We have to think of these as fluid processes. And as fluid processes, we have to ask, what is the enabling environment you need to create to ensure that there is security of the individual as they move between the rural and urban, the formal and the informal? That requires a robust social protection system. We've built it for rural India, but lockdown showed us we forgot all about the urban worker, which is really where jobs are going to come, and that's why we should be paying our attention.
And that is where I think Rajiv's point about informality comes in, and in how informal workers have no security whatsoever. Let them at least earn a living, but also make sure that they are secure. You have safety nets for them just in case they fall into distress. Before we go to the audience, I think this is going to be my last question to you, Rajiv. You obviously talked about, in some ways, investment is not happening at the level that we should be seeing in this country. What is driving that? Because there may be an answer in that.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about private sector investment, it's been a puzzle because in the last few years, there have been massive tax cuts with the hope that the corporate sector would actually, use that money to invest. But maybe they have not because there's a lot of underutilization of existing capacity. So as a result, they've not really taken their savings and gone out there and invested in new plants and new factories and new shops or whatever else they do. So that's one part of that answer. But I want to take a bigger picture, give you a bigger picture response to this concept of investment, right? Now, if we're trying to, as policymakers, we're interested in creating more good jobs. One part of that puzzle is private sector investment, which will drive possibly manufacturing and more formal sector jobs, even in services, etc. That we've not seen enough. Government has been coming up with capital expenditure of various kinds, which is an investment that will trigger growth and jobs and put in place infrastructure and possibly help improve economic growth over time. But the investment may need to be much more strategic. So, for example, one of the things that the pandemic did for us was it showed that people could work from home. At least from Bengaluru, the city that I'm from, where a lot of high-tech people tend to work, they don't no longer need to sit in Bangalore. They can go back to their hometowns. They can work from there, right? And these are tier 2, tier 3 cities and towns. Now, if this is a phenomenon that could be sustained, there is a company called Zoho where they've literally moved back to villages and said people can work remotely, and the fact that there are a few people in each of these smaller towns earning good money means that there's a driver of economic activity right there. And so if you were to now create co-working spaces or other kinds of infrastructure, which would allow these people to not just work from home, but work from home in a conducive environment where there could also be spill-offs. And these could be invested in by governments, they could be invested in by the educational institutions that they come from, like incubation centers and co-working spaces, things like that. So that's one example of very targeted strategic investments, which will enable activity to boom in taking advantage of one trend of work from home. Another, of course, is the investment where we say, look, in every village we want these kinds of services to be available. We want people to be available who are trained in elder care and telemedicine, people who take care. We actually have ASHA workers and Anganwadi workers and all who are massively underpaid, but actually perform a very, very crucial role. We probably need to enhance their capacity and emoluments, right? That's another dimension. We need to think about this whole concept of investing in, green jobs, right? Because we're talking about climate change and where things are going. And the urbanization that's happening across India is happening without any regard to natural systems and their protections. Ecosystems are being destroyed in the name of development. And the backlash will come a few years later when everything goes haywire, when you have floods and natural disasters of various kinds. But again, in our Congress manifesto, we had this whole wasteland regeneration mission, water, protection mission. We would, train and employ large numbers of people. And of course, renewable energy in a decentralized manner, again, will require a lot of people to have training. So basically, we need to start thinking about not just investment, but investment where, by whom? Private sector, government, non-profits, public, private, so those sorts of issues. And I think along with that, this whole business of how do you prepare and repair our youngsters before we lose that demographic dividend right in front of our eyes.
Just one additional point. I think this makes a lot of sense. But let's start with the premise of jobless growth. That implies there's growth. And I think one of these questions that are raised by the fact that, the private sector is not investing is the growth really there at the levels that we've been suggesting over the last few years? Or is it, according to some people like Arvind Subramaniam, much lower than the numbers actually suggest? Because that would explain the puzzle, that we have growth but no investment. It's suggesting the growth is lower. So one of the answers would also be to let's pump up growth. Let's figure out ways to get that growth back, which we've lost over the last few years.
And of course, the growth of 8% plus was highest in the year of demonetization, which I still do not understand. Yamini?
Just a quick two-finger on this. I think one of the answers that our policy framing has to this problem is we should have more public investment and infrastructure will generate jobs. You'll end up with a virtuous cycle. It'll also create an enabling environment for private investment. I think that the fundamental problem is that we are building infrastructure only in a way that will overall support capital-intensive growth. We are not looking at the infrastructure that the Aam Aadmi needs to be able to participate in that capital investment growth. So are we talking about intercity rail? Are we talking about, so PMJSY created road infrastructure within rural India. We know from evidence that made a huge difference. Are we doing intracity connections in a way that there's better mobility? Are we creating movement networks, housing for people? One of the reasons why it is mostly men that are migrating from rural areas to small cities and then going back, and that movement tends to either be daily movement or a short circular cycles of 2 to 3 months, is because we haven't built safe housing. They're not able to bring their families. Women are not able to move. So are you creating a structure for the real economy where goods, services, and people move and exchange with each other in a manner that facilitates and empowers their innovation? Or are you creating an economy that works really well for all of us and gets us from across the world to interact, but forgets the rest? That's the key.
Let me just add one point you made earlier in our conversation, which is, especially for women, the intracity transport, to the extent that it is safe, will make a big difference in the kinds of jobs. Also, rural to urban, safe transportation would make a big difference in their participation.
And we could go on, but I'm told that now we'll have a few questions, Alim, from the audience. Yeah? Okay, so let's raise our hands. I'll try and get in people who have not spoken so far. So can you help me, Alim?
Just 1 second. Can I request, we'll do the questions, okay. Can I just request my colleagues with the microphones? Where are you?
And those who have not had an
Right.
opportunity so far, that
Yeah.
would be better.
So, 1 second, sir.
आप तो कल बोले थे, इनको थोड़ा सा let us first go to other people.
No,
Just
1
a
second,
second.
1 second.
Alim, please.
Here, the gentleman standing here.
Thank you. Sir, myself Vidyakar Kumar, and I'm a small drop of water from Congress Ocean, and I'm very much happy. अभी बचपन से सर जो हमारा करेंसी है देश का, उस पे देखता था गवर्नर लिखा रहता था, तो हम लोग सोचते थे कि ये क्या होता है. तो आज आपसे मैं इन पर्सन मैं आपसे मिल पा रहा हूं और आपसे मैं बात करने की, तो थैंक्स टू आवर ऑनरेबल चेयरमैन ऑफ AIPC for this opportunity. I'd like to ask you, sir, among Asian countries, China and India together contribute more than half of GDP. In 1987, our GDP was equal to China. But from 2019 onwards, China's GDP is greater than 5 times and now 2.24 or 23%. So what kind of learning we need to, take from China, and why we are not able to, compete with their GDP, sir?
Can we take one more?
Sure. Can we take one from that side there? Yeah, over there. Can we get the mic there? Where Matt? Yeah, the gentleman who's standing there. Mic, please.
Hello? Yeah, go ahead. Somebody's got the mic, let him speak.
Yeah, no issue.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Murthy. I'm a freelance consultant working on water resources and devolution. I worked with World Bank and Tata Trust. Happy to see you. I worked with Yamini for a year in the water and sanitation program. Hi, Yamini. Nice to see you there. Couple of quick questions. Very interesting discussion on the agriculture. I'm not an expert, but I've been traveling in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Odisha, Maharashtra in the last 3-4 months. It's spoken to farmers out of interest. There's a lot of distress there. And a lot of them are saying either the last year they have taken a crop holiday. I think it's a new terminology that's emerging. Or this year they're planning because they're not getting back their investments and they're actually losing money. Forget even subsistence eating and all that. That's point one. Point two is the average age of farmer in Karnataka, the official figures given by the Watershed Development, the Agriculture Development Department, is about 40, 45. So the youth are definitely not participating in farming. Third point, when I asked in Orissa, Karnataka, Andhra, they're not very happily admitting it, but they're saying, yes, the youth is going out, they're trying to find jobs. And they say these are mostly informal jobs in construction or, hotel, restaurant services, so on and so forth. And again, seasonal. So it's not that they're happy to say, yes, he got a job there, he's going and he's helping us. Like we would say, okay, I've gone to Bangalore, I got a formal job. It's not the formal economy. So all these point to a lot of rural distress. And yet we have a country which is, I don't know what's the percent, dependent on agriculture, which is less than 10% of the GDP contribution. It's a fully messed up sector there. And we need to think out of boxes. Add to that complexity is what you're discussing is the water and the whole climate change issues and all that. So I don't have a solution, but I'm trying to say you need to have a out-of-box thinking for the whole lot of rural economy. And you have to be brave and bold about it.
Thank you. Thank you. But can we have some female participation? We'll just
Yes.
take there, Alim?
Right there in front, the lady next to the camera. Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Navika Harshe from the Hyderabad chapter. I'm also an alumni of the University of Chicago, and I work in policy, largely health, and right now we're working on financial literacy and inclusion for lower income household women. And my question was largely on how we go from policy to implementation to advocacy. Because we're seeing, the labor participation ratio of women is extremely low. But what we find, even with the women we work with, and say someone who's my classmate, there's this whole idea built up around how caregiving activity has to be done by women. And it's so emotionally, culturally, psychologically sort of driven that women, mothers, the way your mother will cook for you, no one else can. And how do we sort of, short of saying that your mother doesn't cook well, how do we get these women to come back into the workforce? And I find that this is happening even in the lower income women. Like a lot of them are not taking up jobs in this for this reason. My second question actually is also related to the idea, because I've been reading your book recently on the whole idea of community and state. And here we have women who are forced into a lot of expenditure because of the community. So they're taking loans constantly because the community expects them to spend on marriage and functions. We don't know how to tell them to not do that, because if they stop doing that, there's no state help. You're not able, bank accounts are not there. So how do you, not cut away, but how do you manage a toxic community without support from the state and market? I would like your.
Thank you. Raghu, do you want to take the question on China? Because although China's been growing faster than India for a long time.
Yes, I just want to, comparing two countries is very difficult because obviously there are lots of differences, but it's a very good question. Why did China break away? I'd say a lot of people sort of focus on, some aspects of Chinese policy, but I would say focus also on the initial conditions. China had a much more educated labor force when they started liberalizing in 1980 than India had when it started liberalizing in 1990. It was, they focused much more on education, they focused much more on healthcare. Of course, that has not stayed the course. But China then had a population which was willing to break out when they were given the opportunities. They could move to becoming good factory workers. They could actually, some of them, start village industries, and they grew on that basis. I think India was far less prepared, and we needed sort of the 1990s and the 2000s, post-liberalization, to bring our education at least to a higher level. And we still have to build on that. So I would say the initial conditions look similar when you look at per capita GDP, but they were very different if you look at sort of years of schooling, for example.
And Yamini, you want to take the two other comments that came. One was, of course, on the agricultural sector and what's happening there. That is more of a comment rather than a question, but a plea for thinking out of the box. The other was obviously Navika's on female participation and what's happening there. What do you have? Any thoughts on that?
Thanks. Just one small comment on China, which is that one of the things that China did do is that it invested in its city governance in a big way and encouraged cities to actually compete with each other for economic. And I think, you've spoken about this, Raghu, as well. The fact that we haven't invested in our cities, in our rural governments is a big feature that undermines both our ability to do basic things like health and education, but also create hubs, manufacturing hubs across the country. So that's something that I think we should be thinking about a lot more going forward. On Murthy, on the agriculture question, I mean, your point is absolutely well taken, and I've been arguing for some time now that I think we have in the imagination that the best way to solve the problem of agriculture is to get people out of agriculture. We stopped thinking about agriculture until we got the farm laws. But we also stopped thinking about the rural economy period and kept hoping that, as the economy grows more broadly, you will see movement out. We did, of course, do a lot in terms of building safety nets in the rural economy, but we didn't think about, in a serious way from a policy point of view, I feel, actually building the rural economy and integrating it into the economy, because we just hoped that would happen automatically and we invisibilized it. What COVID has taught us, if we needed to be taught this, is that in fact the rural economy is the sponge for the Indian economy. It is what holds the entire economy together and prevents it from going down the road of starvation. We bet on some parts of agriculture, the strong parts of agriculture in paddy and rice, Haryana and Punjab, got ourselves into a lot of trouble at some level today. That's one of the big challenges with the economy, but also that saved us in terms of our food security needs in the time of crisis. And that puts an even bigger challenge that we confront, because at this point in time, if you take the climate problem and if you take some of the big inequities in agriculture policy, the only route out is through crop diversification, or the critical route out is through crop diversification and building markets. But crop diversification is hard at a time when rural income is so distressed, because if you look, we don't have good enough data, but I think if you do a serious consumption survey, and you can see it in small surveys that are coming out over these last 2 years, households have shifted from proteins back to cereals. So that's going to create its own kinds of tensions as we go forward. So taking the rural economy seriously, bringing it to the front and center center of our discussions on the Indian economy, I think is going to be crucial if we want to get out of the conundrum that you speak about. To your challenge of toxic communities and how do we move from toxic communities, and what is the role of state and market there, it's a very crucial question that you place. And I don't have a good answer, but I'll tell you some of the tensions that I have been thinking about in the context of the question you raise. At one level, if you look at the history of post-independence India to the place where we are now, I think we were hoping more than perhaps we should have on the capacity of the Indian state, and by which I mean both its administrative architecture as well its legal architecture and the political system that we built on it, to engineer social change from below. And I wonder today, as I look back and look at where we are, whether that was too much of an expectation and that there had to be an intersection between social movements and the state in order for that transition and transformation to take place. And I think that that's also part of the political challenge that we confront. So I don't know that the state can necessarily be the instrument for shifting norms. What the state can do is to create an enabling environment for norms to shift. One of those relates to what we've been talking about in terms of female labor force participation. Can we invest in infrastructure and industry and manufacturing that can create an environment for more women to participate in the economy, those who want to participate in the economy? That will, I think, create conditions for women to have greater bargaining power and intra-household bargains to work in a way that enhances women's voice within the family and within the community. Can we also recognize that there is going to be a process of transition? And I think some part of the female labor force participation story, it's a small part, it's a hidden part, but is about this transition, which is as economies grow and as education systems evolve, there are probably household choices being made about investing in the next generation for greater social mobility. I think some part of this is happening, and that's why the silver lining for me in the education story is that maybe, just maybe, we are getting to a sweet spot, certainly in northern India, where for the first time, you're likely to have children entering the schooling system with mothers that have spent at least 5 to 8 years inside a school for some portion of the time. Now, that has been a bad education, that's for sure, but at least a certain piece of what it means to sit in a classroom, what it means to think about worksheets and homework. And COVID helped too, because even though the schooling system was closed down, some little attempts were made to get teachers to parents. In fact, in November, I was sitting in this hall when a group of state governments had come together to have a session on what we learned about how we did education for elementary schooling during COVID. And we had educators, government bureaucrats, teachers, all from the government system sharing their experiences. And there was a lot to learn for everything that was wrong. There were attempts to try and use technology, WhatsApp, teachers getting to homes. So all of this may create, it is likely that women are also making some degree of empowered choice to invest in their children, and going forward, things may look better. Markets, I believe, replicate a lot of what societies are about, but it's a negotiation process, and state and society need to negotiate together to create the eventual emancipatory potential of what markets can actually give us.
Just to add to that one last bit, which is that we also talked about social safety nets. If you have a safety net, you're much less reliant on the community to be your safety net. Yeah. And therefore, you can reduce the investment. Of course, you don't want to go to the other extreme, where you totally abandon the community and you rely only on the formal safety net, and that proves inadequate. So as Yamini said, the village, the rural area is still the absorbent for what doesn't work in the city. We need to continue some of that till we have a much more effective safety net. But as the safety net develops, you're no longer imprisoned in the way that you spoke by the community itself.
Just one or two things to add. Yeah, so the safety net is Manrega. And Manrega is, you've seen demand really shoot up, which means that rural distress has gone up tremendously. You take Manrega employment when you have nothing else. The second factoid is that farmers nowadays are earning more from wages than from crops. So you actually, by doing other kinds of work, possibly including Manrega, rather than from agriculture itself. The real income of farmers, contrary to the Prime Minister's promise of having doubled it by today or something like that. Yeah, he said by 5 years, farmers' incomes would double. Nominal incomes have grown, but in real terms, they've gone down tremendously. We have just not done enough for not just crop diversification, but income diversification, farm and non-farm, horticulture. See, if cities are growing, if people's dietary practices are changing, people are willing to eat more eggs and meat and things like that, where are those going to come from? They're going to come from rural India. Then there's much more that can be done in that on that dimension. There's much more that can be done in terms of value addition at the farm. In India, it's abysmal. There's practically nothing. You just grow it and you sell it. That's it, right? So those sorts of situations, and there may be lots of other, local, food opportunities, branded food opportunities, because there's so much variety in India in terms of cuisines and the kinds of cultural practices that go into food, that you can create businesses in rural India as well. But nothing has really happened. And villages now are, older people, maybe mothers and children, and the men have moved out. Yeah.
We've actually got quite a few questions. So, sir, are you all right if we do another 10, 15 minutes? Because people are really keen to ask you questions.
Yeah, it's okay, right? I mean,
Okay.
yes, please.
So people have already got the mics. So first you, then you, please.
Hello everyone, this is Rajdeep from West Bengal AIPC. Hello. Okay. Yeah, I'm a member of NASCOM and closely associated with two of the programs which Raghuram sir was mentioning yesterday. One is the Chip Development Program, and another is the Future Skill Program, which is the government initiative for skill development. I have specific questions. I'm coming from West Bengal. So when you go to West Bengal nowadays, you find a lot of dole policies being given by the government, where your qualifications or your action doesn't matter. You just come and get a certain amount of money. So these kind of freebies what we are having in state of West Bengal, there people aging for a job is not like that. So there is a freebie policy. So my question towards you would be, first, is that what's your take on these kind of policies whereby we are not engaging people for performance, we are simply giving out a portion of the money to them. And this is the flavor of the people in West Bengal. If we talk about jobs there, probably people would not take it in a very better manner because they are already getting paid in somehow manner. So the first question is, what is your take on these kind of freebie policies where performance doesn't matter and something else matters? That's the first portion. Second portion comes from the speech that you had given yesterday, Raghuram sir. It was about putting focus back on service sector and growing the skill set from the educational institutes, right? I, being a part of telecom service sector for last 20 years, it makes sense for me. But my question would be precisely when we need to start. The reason being, most of these infrastructure projects were initiated in the UPA time. Maybe right now they are 70 to 80% they are completed. There's a huge money investment that is going on. So in this scenario, we cannot simply stop the ball. So when we should start, we understand the whole ecosystem that you have given. We understand that thing. But where to start from a policy point of view? Okay. Third question.
Actually, if you ask so many questions, people won't have opportunities. So
okay.
please.
Sure.
Okay,
This-
who is?
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, myself, Rajesh Kumar Sethi. I am from Nagaland chapter, fellow member. My question is, actually recently we have seen that Gautam Adani has become the fourth richest man in the world. I don't know, because he has a debt of 2.2 trillion money, which is almost 50% of the Indian people's money. How he has become the richest person? Since he has got so much money from the banks and all, why we, the people from Northeast, Nagaland especially, we are not getting loans from bank to start our businesses and all? So your point of view, sir, I wanted to know.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
The next mic is here. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
No.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. This is Rajesh from New Delhi chapter. Since I'm running an MSME unit, and my premises is that I believe after 2024, Congress is going to be a center. So my first question is that after 2024, after all the best of the last 10 years, what are the key policies for MSME we have to rethink and redefine so that it will give a benefit and will help MSME to move forward? The second question to Dr.
No,
Rajan.
sorry,
No,
just
I
one question, otherwise others
Just a
won't-
small comment, sir.
Okay, very small, very small.
Just a very personal question to Dr. Rajan, sir. Since we have Dr. Manmohan Singh as leading a UPA government earlier, can we see a professional running the government, and what role we can see of Dr. Rajan in future?
Okay, so let's do this.
We've got two more questions here with the
But
mics
they
on.
won't remember all the questions.
Okay, so we'll start with that.
So do you want to take some first?
Sure. Very quickly. Now I'm already forgetting the question. The first one was. Okay, let me answer the Adani question because I remember that. I mean, I really, I do think that that is a relevant question because I think India probably holds the record for the highest wealth of an individual to the average per capita income in the world. Because if he's fourth richest, the first three are in America, which is the average wealth is much higher. And of course, this is not a record that we want to have. The question you're asking is an important one because one of the important features of a strong economy is a lot of competition, a lot of opportunity for everyone. Now, I think Mr. Adani is very competent at certain kinds of businesses, but is he competent at every business? And how is he in every business? And is that because of natural competence or is it because of proximity to the government? That is a question we have to ask. And the relevant question you're asking is how indebted are his businesses? How much does the Indian banking system support this? Because we have some rules in the Indian banking system on the concentration of loans, because the more concentrated they are, the more their risk there is, because the industrialists could have problems. So I think these are all issues to examine in detail. I don't know the answers to some of it. It could be that he's very competent in every business he enters. It could be that he hasn't taken very many loans from the banking system. It is on the basis of his performance. But I think this is something worth investigating, and it is something that we should look at very closely. The other question was...
No, here.
No follow-up. No, please.
Answering
Hello.
sorry, maybe you remember the questions, I'll come back.
The NASCAR, yes, can you
may
just
I ask?
quickly summarize the...
Yeah, may I?
I think the question was on
the freebies.
the freebies.
Yes.
The freebies policy, look, I think a certain amount of cash transfers to the very poor is warranted, but as we talked yesterday, it's an attempt to get them to invest in human capital so that they don't have to continue to be recipients of those freebies. To the extent it keeps them stuck there, obviously it's a problem and we have to find a way to make them get out of it. Freebies to the more general population, steam cooker, this, that, I'm not sure that's the best investment for government. That there are as so many public policy needs, what we call public goods, healthcare systems, education systems, which I think can help people sort of stand on their own. And as the Chief Minister said yesterday, even for farmers, if there's a way to transfer to them so that they can use it productively, that is so much better than just to sustain consumption by providing these. So I think freebies have to be re-examined. Very targeted cash transfers, I don't consider freebies. I consider them more sort of welfare support, which I think is okay. But again, the ambition should be to get people out of that state into a state where they can be very productive. This is really a way to get the children from being in that state also, to get them to be participants in the economy.
Yamini, do you want to address this?
Sure, both. There was a question on MSME.
MSMEs as well. And Raji, maybe you can think about what the UPA government might be doing, a future UPA government might be doing for MSMEs also.
So no, just very quickly, I think I don't, if I had the answer to the MSME problem, then, these are complex questions. But I think there's one thing that I worry about and we don't have good data on. It does seem from demonetization, GST to COVID, that the MSME sector has taken a significant hit, that it relied a lot, especially the small and micro, but the small more than the micro, on informal loans as a way of getting by in these difficult phases. So I suspect their balance sheets are in deep distress, but we don't have good data on what's actually going on. I would be so impertinent as to suggest, don't wait for Government of India. You have state governments and MSME and labor regulation. These are all state subjects. I think states that are represented here can certainly, at least at minimum, do surveys and provide data so that we have a better understanding of how deep the distress actually is. And really, I think the fact that there's a huge debt crisis with MSMEs, and we don't really know how bad it is. So some analysis, data, surveys will really go a long way in giving us a better understanding of what there is, and then we can talk about policy solutions. Just very quickly on the freebies issue, I think it's been framed wrong. And I don't like the word freebies. In any case, nothing is free. After all, we are all taxpayers, and it is our taxpayers' money that is going back to citizens in different ways and forms. I think the challenge really is that we've got locked into a vicious cycle, and it links to this jobs problem. There is a social safety net requirement, which is in the form of NREGA, possibly an urban NREGA, social safety nets, cash transfers. These are all very much part and parcel of what needs to be done, what governments should do, what governments must do. Spending on public goods and merit goods like health, education, sanitation, all part and parcel of what governments must do, should do, etc. Because we have been in a vicious cycle of the economy, we are giving freebies or subsidies or whatever the word you want to use in areas where people should perhaps be paying customers. Power is a good example of that. And I think that this whole discourse on this so-called freebies, A, should find a different term for it. B, it should look much more deeply at what is it about the economy that is driving political incentives to do free power rather than saying, I'll find more jobs.
Okay. I knew you would have something to say about this. Rajiv, the UPA government could be formed at some point, inshallah, in the future. What, anything that you might want to do for the MSME sector? And then I'm going to ask Dr. Rajan about this professionalism, kind of a professional approach to prime ministership and other possibilities.
Anyways, MSMEs that's a very, very broad canvas. There's a lot of variation, in that, under that categorization. So we need to think more along the lines of what's causing, what are their pain points, right? One is access to credit, right? So can their financing be improved in different ways? Can they be, for example, if they are falling under the GST net, then is there some way of giving them, they have difficulties even getting paid and various other sorts of issues. So the financial, there are ways of sort of intervening to make their financial lives much more smooth and and conducive so that they can continue to operate. Then the regulatory environment, right? Regulatory forbearance is a term that we have heard before. And the basic point actually is that forget the formal regulations. The informal, squeezing of their lives that happens, because there are so many rules and inspectors even today. That really is is something that you need to remove. But the more interesting developments are in the context of what you might call digital public goods. Right? So in India, in recent years, you've been having the UPI, and now you have a new platform called the National for Commerce. Okay, there's now a new platform that's coming up, which is going to allow Kirana shops to be online and to be able to access more customers in different ways. Kirana shops are also MSMEs of a kind, but the same thing can be done for factories. The same thing can be done for small industries, because there's this huge gap that needs to be overcome between what someone is producing, and that larger market, which they may not be able to access. See, Nandan Nilekani and crowd are basically coming up with all this. This is online network for digital commerce. That's the new entity that's coming. That's going to compete with the Amazons and the Flipkarts by allowing the small businesses to also participate on a platform, that can also be localized and things of that sort. So the same thing can be extended. So we need to start thinking about what can we do for those people who are left out, bringing them into a much larger, accessing much larger markets, being able to sell themselves. On the credit side, of course, there are also newer ways of developing credible credit scores and demonstrating that they are more, viable and worthy of credit. So there's just quite a lot of work that we can, do as soon as we come to power.
Okay. Now, I know the question that was asked, Raghu, was basically, I think the audience would love it if at some point in the future you could be the finance minister of India. Maybe that happens. But my question to you would be more about what advice would you give to leaders in terms of, based on your own experience, what does a good leader do to deliver on, commitments to the public?
Yeah, I mean, look, first, the premise of the question was you don't need to be a politician. I think that's wrong. You have to be a politician because a politician understands people and understands what their aspirations are. And it is very important to have empathy. You can't be a technocrat with no empathy and expect to have your policies work. You have to have a feeling. So that's very important, and that's why I wouldn't diminish the importance of politicians and somehow say they can be replaced by just technocrats. But I do think that politicians on technical issues should get advice from technocrats. And this is where, listening to just the last person who talked to you and taking actions on that basis without understanding the broader impact, etc., is a problem. As a political leader, you have to listen to trusted advisors, but they have to be a wide circle so that you get all viewpoints and then you can weigh them in making your decisions. Narrow circles, small circles, distrust of the technocrat, that simply doesn't work in making policy in a complex economy. And we've seen the consequences in the last few years of policies taken without widespread consultation based on the idea that you just throw the policy at people, they will accept it. And it turns out they not only don't accept it, but they suffer huge hardship as a result. And I think that certainly needs to change. But I think that answers your question.
I think that does. I think that's very sound advice. No, just let me, no. If you please, is your question here? Please get a mic. Please get a mic.
Sir, I've got a mic and I've got the questions too. Can I?
No, wait.
Here.
No, please give
One
him
second,
a mic.
sir. Please ask your question.
It's all right. Let him ask it. I have questions here.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, because from
Please.
yesterday I'm asking, he's not giving me time to ask a question.
Please continue,
go ahead,
sir.
please
Please
go ahead.
ask the question.
Please.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I am Bobby Panikkar. I'm working president and treasurer of the Nagaland PCC. Now, I want to ask a question to Dr. Dehra Ranjit, because the Prime Minister always keep on telling making in India, making in India.
Mic closer to
Hello?
you. Yeah.
The Prime Minister is keep on telling that make in India, making in India. According to you, last 8 years, has anything done in Nagaland? I mean in India? Or if it has not done, what are the reasons? This is my question.
Okay.
I'm sorry, hasn't what been done in India?
He talks about Make in India. Has anything happened on that front?
India progresses. India never stays still. So now, how much is that is because of good government policy, we can debate. But India grows. Now, have we grown enough? Have we grown at the rate that we want to provide jobs for all the people? Have we grown in all segments, MSME, large firm, etc.? Those are legitimate questions. Now, on the issue of Make in India is certainly a worthwhile objective. If we can make it competitively, we can make it cheaply so that we can make it for our people and for the outside. Now, make in India by cutting off the rest of the world and saying, therefore, we will make in India is a bad policy.
Yes.
And we have done that. Salman has a very nice book on that, on how we went off course and what we need to do to come back on course. So there are differences. Make in India by itself, without understanding where it comes from, is fine. But we should do it in a way that helps our people.
Thank you. Milind Gavandi from AIPC Pune South has a question. And is that you?
No, here. Milind's here.
Milind? Okay, should I ask the question?
Yeah,
Or should,
go ahead.
let me ask on your behalf, Milind, because so that we save some time. Thank you for your question. Basically, what is the truth behind NPAs, non-performing assets? You were in the Reserve Bank of India. You've done considerable work on this. What is really going on? And post-COVID, do you think we might be in a worse position?
Well, on the post-COVID, I will echo Yamini's point. We don't know what's going on in the MSMEs. There's a lot of forbearance which has been applied to the MSMEs. What's the real nature of that? Because we also had the government come out with a scheme whereby they lent to MSMEs who already had loans. And then the question is, how many of those loans will be repaid? Will those be effectively liabilities of the government, or have we sort of converted private sector NPAs into the government NPAs? Those are questions which are hard to answer without going into what exactly happened to the MSMEs, and there we don't have enough data. The banks seem to be saying we don't have big loan losses. I mean, the RBI has been fairly careful in inspecting. Give it another 6 months to a year, we'll know exactly what the size of the losses at the banks are. That still doesn't tell us what has been shifted over to the government through the scheme that the government implemented through and that was about 3 lakh crores to begin with. It became 4 or 5 lakh crores. So that's a big sum of money. Where do these come from? All kinds of things. Bad things happen. COVID happened. So MSME, NPS, but also before COVID, we had the Mudra scheme, which was lending without too much checks and balances. And there, I think a bunch of NPAs developed. The big infrastructure NPAs that were talked about earlier, that came because pre-global financial crisis, we lent a lot. Some of it was corrupt lending, but some of it was genuinely thinking these industries have succeeded, let's lend more to them. And it turned out they didn't succeed anymore because the global financial crisis happened. So I would say there's a variety of reasons, but we need to look back and say what exactly drove it and then deal with that problem.
Okay, so we have time for just one more question, and I'm going to ask it on behalf of Akshay Kulkarni from Navi Mumbai. Akshay, where are you? Oh, there. But let me ask this question for you, please. There are several others who wrote questions. They're very good questions. I thank you for them, but unfortunately, we don't have time. And this is about infrastructure, coincidentally. So there's an unusually massive infra push of almost 100,000 crores in the budget. We'll see how that happens. Is this a fiscally prudent measure, or are we putting all of our eggs in the same basket? And are we staring at another economic disaster in the future because of this huge infra push and putting so much money behind it?
So let me jump in. First, these numbers are all hocus pocus. Don't believe them. Okay. This is the standard practice of this government of making these huge announcements, but the actual investment that would go in would be much less. And even what is budgeted, much less gets spent. So that's one part. The money that is supposed to come in for this infra push also includes a huge amount of foreign investment, which at this moment in the global economy, I don't see that happening. Now, you've also seen money that is supposed to come for all this from disinvestment and privatization. That's also not happening. And where it's happened has been, even with the case of LIC, partial privatization has also been a disaster. So this is, in theory, infrastructure spending on the right infrastructure can have tremendous positive, multiplier effects and all that. However, what is being proposed and announced and the actual follow through in reality, I think there's going to be a huge gap, and you're not going to see us coming out of the kinds of economic situations that we find ourselves in. Instead, if the government had actually cut petroleum taxes and put more money in each of our pockets, we would have found that the economic growth that might have resulted would have, generated enough, benefits of the same larger kind that we're aiming to create through the multiplier impact of infrastructure investment.
Yamini?
So just a quick two finger, there's two things. I think one, the big infrastructure push actually now has to come at the state level. State capex is looking quite difficult, although there's been quite a bit of off-budget borrowing for state capex of late because of the nature of the consistent economic shocks and COVID and what state debt looks like, certainly in amongst the poorer states where the big capex push needs to happen. Relatedly, I think what we need in the economy right now is there's a short-term thing that we need to do, which is to alleviate the immediate distress and respond to the twin crises of the war and climate shocks that have caused their own problems. Wheat and paddy production is low this year relative to earlier. Instead of doing new capex, I think the focus should be on operation and maintenance. You generate quick jobs there, and you'll ensure that all the potholes get fixed, which will help move us forward. Whilst we figure out, I would advocate for capex, not now of the highways, we've done very well there, not for the bullet trains, but for the intracity passenger mails. That's where we need to be paying attention.
Thank you. Any final thoughts from you on this?
No, I agree with all that. On the earlier point about old infrastructure, whether that should be completed, of course, if you've got 80% done, you need to complete that. And I think obviously some of that is unviable, but most of it is viable. And wherever possible, we should complete that. That goes again on the point that that you can choose between capex and do the ones that are most worthwhile.
Thank you. Before we finish, let me recognize people whose questions were not kind of tabled here. Pratisha from Chandrapur chapter. We have Abhijit from Pune chapter. We have MVR Menon from Palakkad. We have Akshay from Navi. Akshay already asked. Then we have Dr. Vijay Lekshi from Trivandrum chapter. We have Deepak, and we have Dr. Oh, we had more. We have Ashutosh from Mumbai East. Milind already asked the question. It is P. Kuru Hakar, I think. Okay. And Rajdeep Banerjee. And Fiza Qureshi, right? Oh. Sanskriti Singh, Dinesh Kumaran, and Ankit Thakur, and then Pramod Tyagi. And that is Gaurav. Gaurav, the full name is not legible. But thank you very much. I really apologize that we ran out of time. We've actually already spent a lot of time. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Rajan, Yamini Iyer, and Rajiv Gowda for an illuminating discussion.
Can I
Thank you so
please
much.
request our honorable panelists to remain on stage and invite Honorable Tamrat Sahuji, Honorable Minister for Home Affairs of the State of Chhattisgarh, Honorable Bhedia Ma'am, Honorable Minister for Women and Child Development, Honorable Pradeep Sharma ji on stage for the lighting of the lamp.
Oh, no, sorry. No, I just ran. She's running.
That's right. Kshitij bhai, momento. Sir.
उनको मोमेंटो दे देंगे आपके साथ और उसके बाद आप देता हूँ आप मैडम एक और बुके
Give me the flower. Center stage. Rajiv Gowda. Gee, this is Rajiv Gowda. किधर खड़ा हूँ? यहाँ से आओ, कम
गड़बो लेके आना, गड़बो बड़ा वाला।
वाले ट्रे कहाँ चल रही बेटा दो और दो Annex.
Respected colleagues, can I please request you to take your seats? The AIPC is going to be adopting a very important resolution. It's very, very important that we do this. Please, I request you to take your seats for another 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Everything. हाँ मिलेंगे नहीं प्रदीप शर्मा जी के साथ फिर गाड़ी लगवा दो सर would you like to take the stage there sir Can I request members of the National Executive of AIPC to please come on stage? Zarita ji. One second, sir. I want the camera crew. Camera crew. Yeah. Come on. You have to do all this. Can we get people to come in? Okay. Respected colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, can I please request you to take your seats? Please take your seats. And can we please get our colleagues from inside to come inside here, from outside to come inside? Okay. Honorable Fellows of AIPC, we are witnessing unprecedented times. We're witnessing an era of unchecked pain and hardship for our country and irreversible change. In light of these and other detrimental developments in our nation, we, the National Executive of the All India Professionals Congress, have a very important statement to make. I now, as Chief Operations Officer, hand over to the Honorable Chairman of the AIPC, Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Alim, I'm told that you had announced that there would be a 10-minute break, so everyone seems to have gone out. I don't know what we can do. Can we ask a few colleagues to call their colleagues back in, because this is something of interest to everyone.
So should we just do it Okay.
All right, then we'll just have to proceed without the other colleagues. You can tell them what they missed. The National Executive on stage here had prepared a draft resolution to share with you all to decide to adopt. And we had initially planned to do it at the end of the conclave in the late afternoon. But given that so many of you have flights and other departures, we thought it'll be best to do this now when everyone was here. We didn't expect half the fellows to go out for a coffee, but there you are. The idea is exactly to have as many of you present as possible to confirm that you agree with the sentiment. Let me read this to you. It'll take a few minutes, so bear with me. On the occasion of the National Conclave to commemorate 5 years of the All India Professionals Congress, the following resolution is tabled for adoption by fellows of AIPC. As India celebrates the 75th year of independence, it is disgraceful that the current dispensation under the leadership of Mr. Narendra Modi has destroyed the essential values of a secular, democratic, plural and federal India as espoused by the founding fathers of the Indian Constitution. Further, the ruling party has not only reneged on its Big Bang promises made in 2014 to revive the Indian economy, but in fact has made the economy sink to its lowest abyss over the last 8 years. To compound the economic problems, according to new data from the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy,
You announce. Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention for 1 minute? This is regarding your movement to the airport. The first bus will leave at 2 p.m. I repeat, the first bus will leave at 2 p.m. 0821 is the number plate. You can find it outside here. The second bus will leave at 3 p.m. There's a bus at 2, there's a bus at 3, there's a bus at 4, and there's a bus at 5. So please adjust accordingly. The buses will be available here in the entry point. The conclave will continue till 6 p.m. in its complete programming. After this event, we will be doing, the state leaders will be breaking for lunch, and then we'll be doing a brief photo session along with the interaction with some of the state leaders. All right, respected colleagues, please take your seats. Rajiv ji. Respected colleagues, it gives me great pleasure to announce the next panel, Rethinking Rural Economies Through Truly Sustainable Communities. Can I please request all of you to take your seats? We will be doing the state leaders panel after this. Can I please invite Honorable Minister T.S. Singhdeo ji, Honorable Health Minister of Chhattisgarh, to the stage. May I also invite Chandan Yadav ji. May I invite Vinod Verma ji. Can I please welcome Mohammad Akbar ji? May I invite Lakma ji on stage, sir? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. My colleagues here, please बैठ जाइए. Please बैठ जाइए. My colleagues, please take your seats. We are pleased to announce Rethinking Rural Economies Through Truly Sustainable Communities. I now hand over to the AIPC West Zone in charge and treasurer, Shri Rajiv Arora ji, and Shri Pratyush Bharadwaj, Vice President, AIPC Chhattisgarh, for this session. Thank you.
नमस्कार. पिछले 1.5 दिन से पूरे देश से आए हुए प्रोफेशनल कांग्रेस के हमारे साथी बहुत ही अच्छे विषयों के ऊपर यहाँ पे विशेषज्ञों से जो बातचीत हुई उसका आनंद ले रहे हैं, उसको आपको बहुत उससे समझने का मौका मिल रहा है, इंटरेक्शन करने का मौका मिल रहा है। आज बहुत ही खुशी की बात है कि इस इम्पोर्टेंट सेशन में हमारे बीच में देश में कांग्रेस के बहुत ही वरिष्ठ नेता और छत्तीसगढ़ के ऑनरेबल मिनिस्टर हैं, जो हेल्थ के मिनिस्टर हैं, उनके पास जीएसटी है और जो कमर्शियल टैक्सेस होते हैं उसका विभाग भी आपके पास है। आदरणीय KS सिंहदेव जी यहाँ पे हमारे बीच में हैं, उनका मैं अभिनंदन करता हूँ, स्वागत करता हूँ। हमारे साथ में क्योंकि हम छत्तीसगढ़ में आए हैं और मैं ऑल इंडिया प्रोफेशनल्स कांग्रेस की जो नेशनल एग्जीक्यूटिव है उसकी ओर से छत्तीसगढ़ की हमारे सभी साथियों को, हमारी छत्तीसगढ़ की टीम को और हमारी क्योंकि यहाँ पे सरकार है और पूरे देश के अंदर इस छत्तीसगढ़ की जो मॉडल है, उस सरकार में जो काम हो रहे हैं उसकी चर्चा है और आपने जो जिस तरीके से हम सब लोगों का यहाँ पे स्वागत करा है, अभिनंदन करा है, जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन करा है, उसके लिए मैं धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूँ। हमारे बीच में बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण विभाग जिनके पास हैं, ऐसे मंत्री जो अभी ट्रांसपोर्ट, फॉरेस्ट, हाउसिंग, एनवायरनमेंट और लॉ को देख रहे हैं। मोहम्मद अकबर जी वो हमारे बीच में हैं, उनका भी मैं स्वागत करता हूँ, अभिनंदन करता हूँ। हमारे साथ में अन्य मंत्री हैं, कार्सी लखमा जी जो छत्तीसगढ़ पूरे देश में यहाँ की जो फॉरेस्ट है, यहाँ की जो आदिवासी पॉपुलेशन है उसके लिए जाना जाता है और क्योंकि पूरे देश की निगाह रहती है, पूरी दुनिया की निगाह रहती है इस क्षेत्र के ऊपर और पिछले 20-22 वर्ष पुराना ही छत्तीसगढ़ बना हुआ है। उसके बाद से आदिवासी समाज, आदिवासी इकोनॉमी आज की जो बात कर रहे हैं हम, वो सस्टेनेबल कम्युनिटीज़ के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं। तो लखमा जी ऐसी कम्युनिटी से आते हैं और आप वरिष्ठ मंत्री हैं यहाँ पे इंडस्ट्री और कॉमर्स के, आपका भी बहुत बहुत स्वागत है लखमा जी। हमारे बीच में एक बहुत ही युवा नेता ऑल इंडिया कांग्रेस कमेटी के सेक्रेटरी हैं, इंचार्ज हैं छत्तीसगढ़ के, जो अपने पिछले 20-25 वर्षों में NSUI यूथ कांग्रेस से निकल के जो JNU से इन्होंने MPhil करा, डॉक्टरेट करी, US के डिपार्टमेंट के एजुकेशन के लिए गए। श्री चंदन यादव जी हमारे बीच में हैं। चंदन यादव जी आपका भी बहुत बहुत स्वागत है, अभिनंदन करें। क्योंकि टाइम की कमी है तो सीधे ही अपन शुरुआत करते हैं जो हम लोगों को सोचना है। और मैं सिंहदेव साहब हमारे बीच में आए हैं, आज मैं कोशिश करूंगा कि उनसे औरों से भी सबसे बात करनी है, लेकिन आपका विशेष अनुभव हमको सुनना है और जानना चाहते हैं। ये सरकार और जो लोग हैं यहाँ पे, इस देश के जो नागरिक हैं और इस आपके जो छत्तीसगढ़ के जो साथी हैं, उनके सामने मेरे ख्याल से एक बहुत बड़ी चुनौती होगी कि कैसे ये जो कम्युनिटीज़ हैं, जो सस्टेनेबल कम्युनिटीज़ हैं, लंबे समय से जो प्रकृति के संग जुड़ी हुई रही हैं, उनको कैसे रूरल इकोनॉमी में और प्रदेश की इकोनॉमी में उनको कैसे जोड़ा जाए, उनका कैसे लाभ दिया जाए। तो मैं आपसे चाहता हूँ कि इस विषय में थोड़ा सा बताएं जो छत्तीसगढ़ में काम हो रहा है।
धन्यवाद। आदरणीय शशि थरूर जी, सोज साहब, मंच पे उपस्थित सभी सहभागी, मॉडरेटर्स, चुनाव के पहले राहुल जी ने हम लोगों को एक मैनिफेस्टो बनाने की जिम्मेदारी दी थी, पीपल्स मैनिफेस्टो, जन घोषणा पत्र। और उस दरमियान छत्तीसगढ़ में क्या हो सकता है, ये टॉप डाउन की जगह हम लोगों ने प्रयास किया था कि बॉटम अप उसमें लोगों की राय शुमारी करके और जानकारी ले, उस हिसाब से योजनाएं अगर हमारी सरकार आती है तो उनको बनाए। लोगों ने भरपूर समर्थन दिया, सरकार आई और मूल जो सोच इस सरकार की भी है, हम लोगों की भी थी, वो यही थी कि लोगों के क्रय क्षमता को हम कैसे बढ़ा सकते हैं। बेसिक इशू, पैसे उनके पास हो जिसके माध्यम से खर्चे करके अपने परिवार की बेहतर स्थिति और बेहतर स्थिति वो बना सके, यही चुनौती थी, ये कोई नई बात नहीं है, सर्वविदित बातें हैं। और जो परिवेश आपने दिया कि ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में रहने वाले, ग्रामीण अर्थव्यवस्था, शहरी अर्थव्यवस्था, इसके अंतर को हम कैसे कर सकते हैं, ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में रहने वाले लोगों की आर्थिक स्थिति में, क्रय क्षमता में हम कैसे सुधार ला सकते हैं। ये रोज हम देखते हैं कि शहर में कोई काम करने के लिए आता है, डेली वेज अर्न करने के लिए आता है, 400 रुपए प्रतिदिन की भी उनको पारिश्रमिक मिल सकती है, 500 की भी मिल सकती है। गांव में वो काम करता है 200 रुपए में, 200 रुपए के आसपास में वो काम करते हैं। तो ये जो अंतर बना रहता है और जो लोगों की क्रय क्षमता को सीमित करता है ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में, इसमें हम क्या कर सकते हैं। कई चीजों पे उस समय विचार हुआ लोगों की रायशुमारी से, और सरकार ने उसको इम्प्लीमेंट किया। ऐसे छोटी बातें हो सकती हैं लेकिन गहरा प्रभाव डालती हैं। तेंदुपत्ता, ये बीड़ी हम जिससे बनाते हैं, हमारे यहाँ उसको तेंदुपत्ता बोलते हैं, कहीं केंदू बोलते हैं। इसका पारिश्रमिक 100 बंडल का, 1000 बंडल का 2500 रुपए था, उसको 4000 रुपए करना। ये घोषणा पत्र में भी था, अकबर भाई भी घोषणा पत्र के सदस्य रहे थे, साथी रहे थे, और उसको लागू करके हमने सीधे तौर पे उनकी क्रय क्षमता को बढ़ाया। वन उपज, उसमें केंद्र सरकार ने पहले न्यूनतम समर्थन मूल्य कुछ वन उपज पे रखा था, बाद में उसको हटा दिया, और हम लोगों की परिकल्पना थी कि पुनः गांव में रहने वाले लोग, जंगल के समीप रहने वाले लोग, इनकी आर्थिक स्थिति में सुधार हमको लाना है, तो पैसे उनके पास हम कैसे पहुंचाएं। तो तेंदुपत्ता के अलावा करीब 50, अकबर भाई एग्जैक्ट नंबर बता सकते हैं, 50 से 70, 65, वो घोषणा पत्र से 50 से 70 हम लोगों ने लिखा था। तभी 65 वन उपज को न्यूनतम समर्थन मूल्य के माध्यम से जोड़ के, और शायद देश में सबसे ज्यादा रकम की वन उपज की खरीदी आज छत्तीसगढ़ कर रहा है। तो न्यूनतम समर्थन मूल्य आपने महुआ में भी दिया, आपने अन्य वन उपजों में भी दिया, और ये सुनिश्चित किया कि लोगों के पास पैसा पहुंच सके। और हमारे ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में रहने वाले लोग क्या काम करते हैं, खेती का काम करते हैं। छत्तीसगढ़ को राइस बोल माना जाता है। अब तो अन्य राज्यों में यहाँ से ज्यादा भी कड़ी की उपज होती होगी, धान की उपज होती होगी, लेकिन बहुत दिनों से स्वामीनाथन कमेटी इत्यादि ये सब की बातें होती रही थी। लेकिन कैसे किसानों को हम एक न्यूनतम भाव उपलब्ध करा सके उनके कृषि की उपज का, ये चुनौती हमारे सामने थी। तो ग्रामीण अर्थव्यवस्था को और परिवारों को आर्थिक रूप से सुदृढ़ करने के लिए इस बात को भी हमने अपनाया, घोषणा पत्र में भी अपनाया। सरकार ने आने के बाद पहला निर्णय जो किया था, ऋण मुक्ति का, ऋण माफी का, पिछले साल के जो शॉर्ट टर्म लोन थे उनको माफ करना। इसमें बातें आती हैं कि भाई ये आजकल रेवड़ी का नाम लोगों ने दे दिया है, हमारे प्रधानमंत्री ने इसको रेवड़ी का नाम दुर्भाग्य से दे दिया है। लेकिन इससे होता क्या है, मेरी समझ में अगर 5000 करोड़ या उससे ज्यादा के लोन को आप माफ करते हैं, तो ये 5000 करोड़ रुपए लोगों की जेब में आप छोड़ते हैं कि वो खर्चा कर सकते हैं और अपने परिवार की स्थिति को मजबूत करा सकते हैं। ये रेवड़ी नहीं है, ये सीधे सीधे उनकी आर्थिक स्थिति को सुदृढ़ करने का एक प्रयास है। आप धान की खरीदी करते हैं, न्यूनतम समर्थन मूल्य में खरीदी करते हैं, उस समय 1600 रुपए प्रति क्विंटल, अभी 1800-1900 रुपए प्रति क्विंटल। पार्टी की परिकल्पना थी कि हम कम से कम 2500 रुपए में धान की खरीदी करेंगे, 15 क्विंटल की खरीदी करेंगे। उसके ऊपर या गर्मी का धान होगा तो किसान बाजार में भेज सकता है, लेकिन प्रति एकड़ 15 क्विंटल तक के धान की खरीदी सरकार सुनिश्चित करेगी कि 2500 रुपए कम से कम किसान को मिले। तो न्यूनतम समर्थन मूल्य अगर 1600 है तो सरकार 900 रुपए और
900 रुपए जी, डिफरेंस जो है
वो सरकार देगी। इसमें अड़चन आई, केंद्र सरकार ने लिखित में ये भेज दिया कि अगर आप बोनस देंगे तो हम आपका चावल नहीं उठाएंगे। एफसीआई के माध्यम से जो चावल उठता है, केवल जो पीडीएस का चावल है या एक सीमित क्वांटिटी है, हम उतना उठाएंगे। जो किसान आपके यहाँ धान लेके आएगा, वो पूरे धान आपको खरीदना है तो खरीदो, हम एफसीआई के माध्यम से उस चावल को नहीं
खरीदेंगे।
बावजूद उसके इस सरकार ने इसको बड़ी चुनौती के रूप में माना। पहले साल बोनस के रूप में भी राशि उपलब्ध कराई, और अब जो नीति सरकार ने अपना रखी है वो 9,000 रुपए प्रति एकड़
जी
धान की फसल के लिए। और अगर आपने पिछले साल धान लगाया था और इस साल आप धान के एवज में दूसरी फसल लगाते हैं, ट्री प्लांटेशन इत्यादि करते हैं, तो 10,000 रुपए प्रति एकड़। तो अब फिर से ग्रामीण क्षेत्र के परिवारों की आर्थिक स्थिति को सुदृढ़ करने के लिए सीधा कदम, सीधी राशि उनके तक पहुंचाना, ये इसके माध्यम से कर रहे हैं। और आज छत्तीसगढ़ के किसानों को 2,600 रुपए से ज्यादा धान का कीमत मिल रहा है।
बहुत बढ़िया है, तो
घोषणा
बहुत
पत्र
बहुत खुशी की बात है ये।
2500, कम से कम 2500 था, इस साल 2630, 2640 रुपए किसान को मिलेंगे, अर्थात उनकी आर्थिक स्थिति सुदृढ़ होगी। सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स हैं, सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स में मैंने कुछ आंकड़े रखे थे, करीब 20 लाख मेरे ख्याल से सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स होंगे छत्तीसगढ़ में, 20 लाख से ज्यादा।
अच्छा।
और इनके माध्यम से महिलाओं को सशक्त करने के लिए जो पहल किया गया है, उसमें मोटे तौर पे अगर हम देखेंगे तो ये हाउस होल्ड्स करीब 23,46,000 इसमें आते हैं। सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स जिन्हें रिवॉल्विंग फंड दिया गया है वो 1,51,000, और जिन्हें अमाउंट इसका रिवॉल्विंग फंड का 226.98 करोड़ रुपए, और सीआईएफ कम्युनिटी इन्वेस्टमेंट फंड के नाम से जो 60,000 रुपए उनको उपलब्ध कराए जाते हैं, ये 99,355 एससीजीज को 596.13 करोड़ रुपए उपलब्ध कराए गए। तो ये राशि सीधे उनको उपलब्ध हो रही है, जिससे कि वो उद्यम कर सकें, कोई काम कर सकें, अपनी परिवार की आमदनी में बढ़ोतरी कर सकें। और टारगेट हम लोगों ने जो रखा था कि परिवार की आमदनी कितनी है, इसकी भी समीक्षा करिए। सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स तो चल रहे हैं, लेकिन वास्तविक कमाई उनकी कितनी हो रही है। तो हमारा जो आकलन आया वो 2,000 से कम प्रति माह जो आमदनी है वो 1,62,454 परिवारों की, 2 से 5,000 प्रति माह की आमदनी 5,05,239 परिवारों की, 5 से 8,000 रुपए प्रति माह की आमदनी 2,26,400 परिवारों की, और 8,000 प्रति माह औसत आमदनी 1,29,524 परिवारों की। तो ये कलेक्टर रेट का एक मापदंड रखा था, करीब 9,000 हमारे यहाँ कलेक्टर रेट है। दो अर्बन एरियाज और रूरल एरियाज में थोड़ा अंतर है। तो उसके आसपास हर परिवार को हम आमदनी उपलब्ध कैसे करा सकते हैं, इस टारगेट को लेके अनेकों योजनाओं को जोड़ के, वो टॉपअप की बात आई थी, एनुअलाइज्ड इनकम की जो बात आई थी, राहुल जी ने जिस कंसेप्ट को रखा था, हम लोगों ने उसी को अपना रखा है कि एक मिनिमम इनकम होनी चाहिए। अगर 6,000 है तो 72,000, 8,000 है तो 12,98, 1 लाख। तो कितने सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप के परिवारों को हम लखपति बना सकते हैं, 1 लाख से ऊपर की आमदनी कितने परिवारों की कर सकते हैं। तो ये विभिन्न तरीकों से ये प्रयास चल रहा है। जो हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स हैं,
लोगों का पैसा है, कैसे भी
पैसा असली चीज है, पैसा। बाकी हम मेरा ये पर्सनल विचार है कि मैं संतुष्ट नहीं होता कि हमने बड़ी अच्छी सड़क बना दी,
हाँ।
सड़क में हमने पैसा डाला और लोगों के परिवार की आमदनी नहीं बढ़ी, तो मेरे हिसाब से वो पैसा उचित खर्च नहीं हुआ।
जी हाँ, सही की बात कर रहे हैं।
आपने बिल्डिंग बना दी, बड़ी बड़ी बिल्डिंग बना दी, और परिवार के आमदनी में अगर इजाफा नहीं हुआ तो वो पब्लिक मनी का मुझे लगता है कि सही
यूज नहीं हो रहा
नहीं हुआ।
जी।
तो आमदनी कैसे बढ़नी,
वो इम्पोर्टेंट है।
टारगेट सीधा टारगेट करके कि आमदनी और मिनिमम कितना,
जी।
तो कलेक्टर रेट एक परिवार को हम उपलब्ध करा सकें, इस बेस को लेके ये विभिन्न योजनाएं चल रही हैं। गन्ने का अकबर भाई ने 355 रुपये, आज मेरे ख्याल से देश में शायद ही कोई प्रांत होंगे जो गन्ने के न्यूनतम समर्थन मूल्य के ऊपर 355 रुपया उपलब्ध करा रहे। मक्के का न्यूनतम समर्थन मूल्य, तो किसानों के लिए, और प्लस अर्बन रूरल सेंटर्स में प्रोडक्शन सेंटर्स कि जो कृषि आपकी उपज है उसकी खपत कैसे होगी। आपने सस्टेनेबल शब्द भी इस्तेमाल किया, सरकार एक हद तक हैंड होल्डिंग कर सकती है, एक हद तक सरकार पैसे दे सकती है। उसके बाद सिस्टम ऐसा बनना चाहिए कि वो आप
अपने आप ही
अगर
करे।
उत्पादन कर
जी,
रहे हैं तो
बिल्कुल।
उसकी खपत भी हो। खपत कहाँ होगी? अगर प्रोडक्शन की इकाइयां नहीं है तो टारगेट था कम से कम 200 ऐसी इकाइयां जो कृषि उपज के आधार पे बनी हुई हो या वन उपज के आधार पे बनी हुई हो, जिनसे पुनः जो टारगेट है 8,000 रुपया प्रति माह की औसत आमदनी लोगों को हो
मिल
सके, ये प्रयास
जी।
छत्तीसगढ़ सरकार कर रही है।
नहीं, बहुत बड़े विस्तार से सिंहदेव साहब ने बताया कि छत्तीसगढ़ में क्या काम हो रहा है अभी, क्योंकि हम देखते हैं क्लाइमेट चेंज है और सस्टेनेबल जो जो बात हो रही है वो मेरे ख्याल से भी बज हुआ गया पूरी दुनिया में हर चीज़ के ऊपर। अभी मैं वर्ल्ड एक्सपो जाके आया दुबई के अंदर, तो सस्टेनेबिलिटी के ऊपर ही जितने भी पेवेलियंस थे, ग्लोबल लोग आए हुए थे, उसके ऊपर ही बात कर रहे थे। और क्योंकि छत्तीसगढ़ की एक विशेष भौगोलिक परिस्थिति है, यहाँ पे कोई बंदरगाह नहीं है, एक लैंडलॉर्ड स्टेट है और इतना फॉरेस्ट है, आदिवासी कम्युनिटी है, तो यहाँ सस्टेनेबल का बड़ा महत्व हो जाता है। और क्योंकि मोहम्मद अकबर साहब हमारे बीच में बैठे हुए में से पूरे दुनिया में ऐसा कहा जाता है कि 2050 तक 100 में से 70 लोग शायद शहरों में रह रहे होंगे, और जो स्प्रेड हो रहा है अर्बनाइजेशन का, और उसकी वजह से इकोनॉमिक इम्बैलेंस भी बहुत कुछ आता है। तो ये मेरे ख्याल से बड़ा टास्क होगा, चैलेंज होगा आपके सामने कि कैसे हम जो हमारी रूरल इकोनॉमी है, हमारी जो अर्बन इकोनॉमी है, उसको कैसे साथ में लेके चले और दोनों का डेवलपमेंट हो सके, और उसकी वजह से नेचर पे फर्क ना पड़े, लोगों जो आदिवासी जो संस्कृति उस पर फर्क ना पड़े।
एक अकबर भाई बोलने उसके पहले एक और फ्लैगशिप प्रोग्राम छत्तीसगढ़ गवर्नमेंट का NGGB, नरवा गरुआ घुरवा बाड़ी, वो आगे मौका लगेगा तो मैं उसके बारे में भी मैं
आज के इस कॉन्क्लेव का मुख्य उद्देश्य ग्रामीण अर्थव्यवस्था को किस प्रकार से मजबूती देना है। मैं ऐसा समझता हूं, और ये बोलने में अतिशयोक्ति भी नहीं होगी, कि छत्तीसगढ़ एक ऐसा प्रांत है जो पूरे देश में सबसे ज़्यादा यदि ग्रामीण अर्थव्यवस्था को मजबूत देने वाला कोई राज्य है तो वो छत्तीसगढ़ राज्य है। 1,35,000 वर्ग किलोमीटर का छत्तीसगढ़ राज्य, 44.2% वन क्षेत्र, बहुत बड़ा भूभाग वन क्षेत्र में है। अब यदि ग्रामीण अर्थव्यवस्था को मजबूती देने की बात आती है तो सरकार बनने से लेके अब तक, यहाँ तक कि कोरोना काल में भी, जो 2018 के चुनाव में कांग्रेस पार्टी की तरफ से वायदा किया गया था कि तेंदुपत्ता का जो संग्रहण मूल्य है वो 2,500 रुपये से बढ़ाकर 4,000 रुपये प्रति मानक बोरा हम करेंगे, और उसके बाद से अब तक 4,000 रुपये के हिसाब से उसका खरीदी किया जाता है। और ये पूरा जो हिस्सा है ये ग्रामीण लोगों के लिए, वनवासियों के लिए। इतना ही नहीं, 13.5 लाख हमारे हितग्राही हैं जो तेंदुपत्ता का संग्रहण करते हैं। अब तेंदुपत्ता संग्रहण का जो मूल्य है उनको संग्रहण करते समय भुगतान हो जाता है। उसके बाद जब तेंदुपत्ता का विक्रय होगा और सभी खर्च काट कर जो राशि बचती है, 15% काटने के बाद 85% की राशि जो है, 15% इस्टेब्लिशमेंट इत्यादि वगैरह में खर्च करके 85% पारिश्रमिक प्रोत्साहन के रूप में फिर से उनको दे दिया जाता है। लघु वनोपज का जहां तक पहले भारत सरकार की तरफ से था कि 7 फिर 16, लेकिन छत्तीसगढ़ एक ऐसा राज्य है जो 65 प्रकार के लघु वनोपज का क्रय करता है समर्थन मूल्य में। और पूरे देश में ट्राइफेड ने जो आंकड़े प्रकाशित किए हैं उसमें पूरे देश का 74% लघु वनोपज जो क्रय पूरे देश में हुआ है, 74% अकेले छत्तीसगढ़ राज्य ने क्रय किया है। और स्वयं केंद्रीय मंत्री आए थे और मुख्यमंत्री जी के निवास पर उन्होंने 13 पुरस्कार छत्तीसगढ़ सरकार को प्रदान किए हैं।
जी।
कोरोना काल के समय में भी काम की कोई कमी नहीं रही। अब बात ये आती है कि जो ग्रामीण अर्थव्यवस्था को मजबूती, एक तो राशि इतना होना चाहिए कि उनके ऊपर कोई कर्ज नहीं होना चाहिए, और दूसरा ये कि जो दैनिक उनकी जरूरत की जो चीजें हैं तो उसका भी भार कम हो, ताकि कुछ बचत उनके पास हो सके। उसके बाद ही हम कह सकते हैं कि ग्रामीण अर्थव्यवस्था में कुछ मजबूती आई है। शुरुआती तौर पर आप देखेंगे कि लगभग 10,000 करोड़ रुपए का कर्जा माफ छत्तीसगढ़ सरकार ने, सरकार शपथ जिस दिन लिया गया उसी दिन किया। आप खुद साथ में गए थे, तो 10,000 करोड़ का कर्जा माफी हुआ। उसके बाद एक जो बड़ा वायदा कांग्रेस पार्टी ने किया था, अलग अलग तरीके से लोगों की राय थी तत्कालीन सरकार के समय, क्योंकि मैंने अभी ये कहा कि यदि सेविंग कुछ हो पाएगा तो जो दैनिक उनकी जरूरतें हैं उसमें ज्यादा पैसा ना लगे, और यदि ज्यादा पैसा नहीं लगेगा तो सेविंग होगा, सेविंग होगा तो फिर अर्थव्यवस्था ग्रामीण की मजबूती में आएगी। तत्कालीन सरकार में गरीबी रेखा के नीचे जीवन यापन करने वालों को ही राशन कार्ड दिया जाता था। अब गरीबी रेखा के नीचे जीवन यापन करने वालों को राशन कार्ड दिया जाता था, लेकिन जब घोषणा पत्र कांग्रेस ने बनाया तो उसमें यह तय किया गया कि हम सभी को राशन कार्ड देंगे, ऑल, और सबको राशन कार्ड देंगे। जो गरीबी रेखा के नीचे नाम होना जरूरी नहीं है। इनकम टैक्स पेई जो है उसको 10 रुपए किलो में चावल मिलेगा, और बाकी सभी लोगों को 1 रुपए किलो के हिसाब से चावल दिया जाएगा। अब यदि चावल का कॉस्ट हम देखते हैं तो 32 रुपए 86 पैसा कॉस्ट आता है, लेकिन यदि 1 रुपए में मिलेगा तो 1 रुपए में जब उसकी जरूरत पूरी हो गई तो निश्चित रूप से अब बाकी का जो पैसा रहेगा वो सेविंग में जाएगा।
जी जी, सही बात है।
तो जो पीडीएस सिस्टम छत्तीसगढ़ ने लागू किया कि सारे लोगों को हमको राशन कार्ड देना है, इनकम टैक्स पेई है उसको 10 रुपए किलो, और बाकी लोगों को 1 रुपए किलो के हिसाब से हम चावल देंगे। इसके अलावा अब एक बहुत ज्यादा जो हर घर की जो जरूरत है वो बिजली है। तो हमारे घोषणा पत्र में था बिजली बिल हाफ, तो जो बिजली बिल में जो पैसा जाना है अब उसमें भी आधा बच गया, तो वो भी सेविंग में आ गया। तो जिस तरीके से आपने अभी एक योजना के बारे में बात की कि नरवा गरवा घुरवा बाड़ी, नरवा गरवा घुरवा बाड़ी में जो नरवा पार्ट है वो हमारे वन विभाग का है, और वन विभाग ने बहुत ही साइंटिफिक तरीके से जो स्ट्रक्चर का निर्माण होना है, क्या होता है कि कहीं पे भी पानी बहते हुए देखे तो उसमें साइंटिफिक तरीके से उसको हमने देखा नहीं, उसको एग्जामिन नहीं किया, उसका सर्वे नहीं करवाया, और कहीं पे भी स्ट्रक्चर खड़े कर दिए। लेकिन छत्तीसगढ़ में बहुत ही साइंटिफिक तरीके से जो नरवा के माध्यम से जितने भी जो नाले हैं उसको पुनर्जीवित करने की बात है। केवल पानी रोक के पानी सप्लाई कर देना ये नहीं है, उसके स्रोत को पुनर्जीवित करना है।
बिल्कुल।
और पुनर्जीवित करने के बाद ऐसे स्थानों पर स्ट्रक्चर का निर्माण करना है जहां पानी रुके और वो डाइवर्ट हो सके। अभी तक वर्तमान में 23 लाख हेक्टर वन भूमि में जो उसका उपचार हो गया है, जिसमें वाटर लेवल ऊपर आया है। अब यदि वाटर लेवल ऊपर आया है तो आसपास के गांव में एक तो वन्य प्राणियों के लिए पीने का पानी मिलेगा, और दूसरा आसपास के गांव में जब वाटर लेवल ऊपर आएगा तो पानी निकाल के और उसको खेती किसानी में लगाएंगे, और जब खेती किसानी में लगाएंगे तो निश्चित रूप से आय होगी, और आय यदि होगी तो फिर अर्थव्यवस्था उसमें मजबूत होगी।
जी बिल्कुल। मैं लखमा साहब से पूछना चाहता था, लखमा साहब, कि जो पंचायती राज की जो आपकी संस्था है, क्योंकि छत्तीसगढ़ में बहुत मजबूत है वो, और जो मनरेगा है, हमारी जो यूपी सरकार की इतनी बड़ी योजना थी, उसका लाभ कैसे आपके आदिवासियों को और ग्रामीण इकोनॉमी में मिल रहा है, आप थोड़ा उस पर बताएंगे?
मनरेगा विभाग इनका नहीं है।
नहीं है तो नहीं, जनरल आप तो आदिवासी में समझते हो, और ये बताओ नहीं बैठ के बताओ। अच्छा, आप पंचायती राज, आप तो आदिवासी अर्थव्यवस्था में क्या आप परिवर्तन देख रहे हो अभी सरकार के आने के बाद, थोड़ा हम सबको बताएं।
आज हमारा छत्तीसगढ़ में ये प्रोफेसर कांग्रेस का जो 2 दिन का सम्मेलन में सबसे पहले हमारा सांसद पूर्व केंद्रीय मंत्री क्या नाम? अरुण साहब के लिए मैं बहुत बधाई देता हूं। इतना दूर से यहाँ आके 2 दिन में इस कार्यक्रम को आयोजन किया। साथ में इस कार्यक्रम में मुख्य रूप में हमारे वरिष्ठ मंत्री टीएस बाबा, हमारा वन मंत्री अकबर साहब, हमारे प्रभारी संदानी यादव जी, लगातार 2 साल हमारे लगातार सरकार बना 3 साल से हमारे छत्तीसगढ़ को लगातार देख रहा है पार्टी की तरफ से। अभी दोनों अब मंच में बैठे और सामने हमारे सभी लोग इस भोपाल से दूर दूर से जो नौजवान आए हैं उनको सबको मेरी तरफ से बधाई देता हूं। आज हमारे छत्तीसगढ़ बहुत छोटा प्रदेश है साहब। ये जैसा हमारा सरकार बना सबसे पहले कोरोना आ गया। हम लोग लगातार 2 साल में कोरोना में भिड़ गए थे। तो उसके बाद हमारे कोरोना के साथ साथ यहाँ छोटा सा राज्य में मैं थोड़ा सा कोरोना के बारे में बताऊं। ये छत्तीसगढ़ में बहुत बड़ा स्टील प्लांट भिलाई में पंडित लाल नेहरू ने चालू किया है और उसके साथ हमारा रायगढ़ में पूरा देश का राजधानी में ऑक्सीजन नहीं मिलता था। ये छत्तीसगढ़ प्रदेश से दिल्ली में ऑक्सीजन गया है, उत्तर प्रदेश में भी गया है, तुम्हारा गुजरात में भी गया है, मुंबई में भी गया है और कर्नाटक भी गया है। ये छोटा सा राज्य, ये जो विकसित राज्यों को ऑक्सीजन समय हम लोग मदद किया है। आज हमारे जो यूपीए गवर्नमेंट का महत्वपूर्ण योजना था, मनमोहन सिंह के सोनिया गांधी का नेतृत्व का सरकार ने ये जो राष्ट्रीय गारंटी योजना चालू किया और मनमोहन सिंह के समय जंगल जमीन का पट्टा दिए। लेकिन उस समय 2013 से 18 तक भारतीय जनता पार्टी 15 साल सरकार थी, जो पट्टा आदिवासी लोगों को मिलना था वो नहीं मिला। हमारे मुख्यमंत्री छत्तीसगढ़ भूपेश बघेल बनने के बाद, हमारा मंत्रिमंडल गठन होने के बाद जो पट्टा नहीं मिला था, आज आदिवासी लोगों को हम लोग जंगल जमीन को जो पट्टा दिया है, बस्ता रोड सरगुजा का आदिवासी बहुत खुश है। और उसके साथ साहब हमारे वन उपज के बारे में, ये जो मारेगा के बारे में, मारेगा में हम लोग बाकी जगह क्या हुआ, यहाँ पर रोड भी बन रहा है, मारेगा से खेती जो समतल कर रहा है उसका भी, जो पहले हमारा राजस्व जमीन में पुराना पट्टा वाले को हम लोग खेती मरम्मत करते थे, अभी जो जंगल वन पट्टा जो दिया है उनको भी हमारे सरकार जोड़ा है कि वन पट्टा वाला जमीन को भी इस मारेगा से लेबल करे और उसके बाद वहां पर ट्यूबवेल खोदे, वन विभाग के माध्यम से भी हो, चाहे मारेगा से माध्यम से हो, ट्यूबवेल खोद के उनको घेराबंदी तार से फेंसिंग करके वो खेती कर रहे हैं। तो इसलिए और धान खरीदी में भी हम लोग पहले पिछले सरकार ने वो वन जमीन को शामिल नहीं किया था। तो हमारे सरकार आने के बाद ये जो वन जमीन को भी उनको शामिल हम लोग किया है। इसलिए बस्तर के हमारे जो गांव में रहने वाले ग्रामीण भाई लोग ये मरेगा के माध्यम से बहुत अच्छा काम चल रहा है, तो उसका लाभ सुदूर अंचल गांव में रहने वाला को मिल रहा है। और साथ में सर हम लोग सरकार आने के पहले हमारा घोषणा पत्र में हमारे टीएस बाबा जी, हम लोग सब लोग मिल के, टीएस बाबा प्रतिपक्ष का नेता थे और मुख्यमंत्री प्रदेश अध्यक्ष थे और मैं बाबा के साथ 1 साल उप प्रतिपक्ष नेता था। तो इसलिए हम लोग यहाँ पर 90 सीट में अब 71 सीट जीते हैं। ग्राम पंचायत में पंचायत का चुनाव हुआ, सब लगभग जिला हो जनपद हो कांग्रेस पार्टी जीता है। और उसके साथ अभी हमारे जो सरकार के बाद मरेगा में काम करने वाले लोग, जो वार्ड मेंबर है, पंचायत है, सचिव है, सरपंच है, जो वार्ड मेंबर को आजादी के बाद पहला बार हमारे सरकार ने वायदा किया था, अभी दे रहे घोषणा करके, वार्ड मेंबर को महीना 500 रुपया, सरपंच को 2000 रुपया मिलता था, उसको 4000, जनपद सदस्य को 1500 मिलता था, उसको सीधा सीधा 5000, जो जिला पंचायत मेंबर 6000 मिलता था और उनको 10000। इस प्रकार हमारे जो नगर पंचायत नगर पालिका में जो वार्ड पर चुनाव जीते हैं सबको हम लोग डबल तनख्वाह बढ़ाए। इसलिए आदिवासी क्षेत्र में गांव में बहुत खुश है। अभी राहुल गांधी साहब बोला था, अगर छत्तीसगढ़ में वही बात हमारे नेता लोग भी बोले हैं, हमारा छत्तीसगढ़ में कांग्रेस का सरकार बनेगा, 3 वायदा प्रमुख था साहब। जो छत्तीसगढ़ में कांग्रेस पार्टी का सरकार बनेगा 10 दिन के अंदर कर्जा माफ होगा। लेकिन छत्तीसगढ़ में सोनिया गांधी, राहुल गांधी, भूपेश बघेल को मुख्यमंत्री बनने के बाद शपथ जैसा लिया, घर नहीं जाकर माँ बाप को आशीर्वाद नहीं लिया, पहले मंत्रालय में जाकर 2 घंटा में 10,000 करोड़ रुपए कर्जा माफ करने वाला हिंदुस्तान का पहला सरकार होगा। और उसके बाद हमारे बस्तर में एक बहुत बड़ा टाटा कंपनी आदिवासी जमीन लोगों को कब्जा मतलब वो लिया था कि टाटा उद्योग लगाएंगे, लेकिन पूरा जमीन को कब्जा किया, ना उद्योग लगा, ना वहां के लोगों को रोजगार मिला, ना वो धान बेच पाते थे, ना वो खेती कर पाते थे। राहुल गांधी साहब दिल्ली बस्तर में जाके यही बात बोला था, अगर बस्तर के लोगों को अगर हमारे कांग्रेस पार्टी का सरकार आएगा तो वो जमीन आदिवासी को वापस किया जाएगा। सबसे पहले 3 महीने के बाद राहुल गांधी साहब मुख्यमंत्री साहब बस्तर गया, वो आदिवासी का जमीन वापस कर दिया। आदिवासी लोग हमेशा मलबिया में, उल्टी टट्टी में, जंगल में रहने वाले लोग मरते थे साहब। हमारे सरकार ने 8 बाजार क्लिनिक किया तो 2 साल मतलब 3.5 साल हो गया, ये बीमारी अभी नहीं है। अभी हम लोग अकबर साहब वन विभाग के प्रमुख है, तो 25 रुपये में 30 रुपये में मोवा खरीदी होता था। आज इस बात का खुशी है कि हम लोग लंदन से सरकार ने एग्रीमेंट किया है, वो महुआ 30 रुपये में किलो में बेचने वाला महुआ 1 किलो 116 रुपये में
बहुत बढ़िया
लंदन में बेच रहा है। और वहाँ एक डेनिस करके बस्तर दंतेवाड़ा में डेनिस, वो कपड़ा वही के लोग कपड़ा लड़की लड़का वो डेनिस करके छोटे छोटे उद्योग खोले हैं, वो डेनिस के माध्यम से कपड़ा सिलते हैं। पहले हमारा बस्तर में मुंबई से कपड़ा आता था, हम लोग हमारा दंतेवाड़ा से मुंबई में कपड़ा जा रहा है, बंगलोर में कपड़ा जा रहा है।
बहुत बड़ी बात है।
और हमारे बस्तर में सीताफल होता है, सीताफल और इमली, मोवा। अभी हमारे बस्तर में काफी पैदा हो रहा है, काफी। और वहां पर काजू, वो सबको छोटा छोटा फल लगा है और सब लोगों को रोजगार मिल रहा है। इसलिए जो इस साल इसी महीने में जून में पूरा छत्तीसगढ़ में 75,000 ट्रैक्टर लिए। सब बस्तर में आदिवासी लोगों के पास, जिसके पास जिसी गांव में 15 साल भारतीय जनता पार्टी का सरकार में एक पे ट्रैक्टर नहीं था, अभी 20-20 ट्रैक्टर हुआ। तेंदु पैसा का पैसा मिल रहा है, टोरा का पैसा मिल रहा है, मोवा का पैसा मिल रहा है। रमन सिंह सरकार ने 15 साल भारतीय जनता पार्टी 2 रुपया मोवा खरीद ली, हमारा सरकार 50 से 40 रुपया। हम लोग अगर 30 रुपया का मूल्य रखे, 30 रुपया से अगर मोवा कोई लेगा, उसके ऊपर से व्यापारी लेगा तो हम छूट देंगे, उससे नीचे कोई नहीं लेगा।
जी लक्ष्मा जी, मैं चंदन यादव जी से एक प्रश्न पूछ लूं, बीच में कुछ समय कम हो रहा है, 2:15 बजे खत्म करना है।
बोलने के लिए मौका दिया साहब, आपको धन्यवाद। और सामने आए हमारे लोकसभा से यहाँ पर आके उसका भाषण सुनने के लिए आप लोग के बीच में आए। आप लोग थोड़ा समय हमको कमी बोलने जैसा है, लेकिन छत्तीसगढ़ में चाहे व्यापार हो, सोना हो, शादी हो, ट्रैक्टर हो, मोटरसाइकिल तो गांव में जैसे 30 साल में मोटरसाइकिल किसी गांव में नहीं था, अब आदिवासी पास मोटरसाइकिल भी हो गया, मोबाइल भी हो गया। ये कांग्रेस पार्टी का देना है, सोनिया गांधी, राहुल गांधी जी का देना है, हमारा सरकार का देना है, भूपेश बघेल का देना है। मैं इसलिए बोलने के मौका दिया।
थैंक यू। तो चंदन यादव जी का बहुत लंबा अनुभव है छत्तीसगढ़ में। मेरे ख्याल से 2017 से चंदन जी आप यहाँ पे इंचार्ज हो, 5 वर्ष के अंदर ये यहाँ लोगों से मिले हैं, अलग अलग क्षेत्रों में गए हैं, लोगों को देखा है, सरकार की जो नई योजनाएं आती हैं उनके बारे में बड़ी जानकारी है। आपकी यहाँ की सरकार की एक योजना जो गोबर को खरीदना, गोमूत्र को खरीदना और इस तरीके की योजनाएं नई नई निकाली है, तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि ये जो छत्तीसगढ़ है ये सस्टेनेबिलिटी और एफिशिएंसी के अंदर जो रूरल इकोनॉमिक्स में जिस तरीके का काम होना चाहिए उसमें ग्लोबल बेंचमार्क।
हमारे यहाँ साहब जैसे सरकार बना, हरियाली त्योहार को छुट्टी दिए, छठ पूजा को छुट्टी दिए, आदिवासी दिवस को छुट्टी दिए। ये छुट्टी देने से भी आदिवासी लोग, गांव वाला किसान लोग बहुत खुश हैं।
बहुत खुश है जी।
ये सब पहला सरकार है छुट्टी देने वाला।
तो आपका क्या अनुभव है छत्तीसगढ़ का, यहाँ पे रूरल इकोनॉमी पे कैसा काम हो रहा है, एंड व्हाट यू सजेस्ट दैट गवर्नमेंट शुड डू, हाउ स्टूडेंट्स कैन आल्सो बी इन्वॉल्व्ड, महिलाओं को कैसे जोड़ा जा सकता है, थोड़े बताएं इस विषय में।
Yeah, let me thank All India Professional Congress led by Honorable Dr. Shashi Tharoor and his entire team for inviting Team Chhattisgarh to showcase not only the governance model that we have been as a team trying to evolve for the Congress party and also for the nation as well. Plus, also we are trying to develop an organizational model for the Congress party here that we have been trying for last 5 years. The experiment is on and we have been moving towards it. So coming to the topic, मुझे लगता है कि sustainable communities has to be looked through the formula of E square. 1E stands for economics. हमारे तीनों मंत्री महोदय ने, जो हमारी छत्तीसगढ़ सरकार ने इन तमाम सस्टेनेबल कम्युनिटीज के लिए हमने जो छत्तीसगढ़ के जनता से वायदे किए थे, बस्तर टू बिलासपुर, रायगढ़ टू रायपुर, capturing the diversity of Chhattisgarh, social diversity, regional, language, linguistic, gender, all sorts of diversity को capture करते हुए, professional diversity को capture करते हुए, हमने छत्तीसगढ़ के लिए 36 घोषणाएं की थी। टीम लेड बाय बाबा साहब ने जो मैनिफेस्टो बनाया था, उसमें 36 आइटम्स थे जिन्होंने अलग अलग क्षेत्रों के लिए, अलग अलग लोगों के लिए हमने जो प्रॉमिस किया था, उसमें से more than 3/4 of those have been grounded और इस पे काम हो रहा है। वो तो इकोनॉमिक्स का पार्ट है। डिटेल में अकबर साहब और बाबा साहब और कवासी जी ने तमाम लोगों को बताया कि किस तरह से आदिवासी क्षेत्र में, जमीनी इलाकों में, किसानों के लिए, महिलाओं के लिए, हेल्थ सेक्टर्स में, एजुकेशन सेक्टर्स में, ये तमाम पिछले 2 दिन से मुख्यमंत्री भी आके डिटेल दिए। द अनदर एस्पेक्ट जिसका कवासी जी लास्ट में उल्लेख किया, the emotional part of it. The another E stands for emotions. So any community has to be served through this formula. कि आप उसके जो विकास के मायने हैं, जो उसके विकास के मुद्दे हैं, दिनचर्या के मुद्दे हैं, उसको एड्रेस करना, और दूसरे उसके लिए कम्युनिटी में जब हम रहते हैं, उस कम्युनिटी का मान, सम्मान, अधिकार, न्याय उसको लगे कि उसको मिला है, उसकी लोकतंत्र में उसकी आवाज और लोकतंत्र में उसका रिप्रेजेंटेशन और उस डिसीजन मेकिंग में डाइवर्सिटी का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है वो सब है कि नहीं। सो आई एम वेरी हैप्पी कि छत्तीसगढ़ में तो लोगों के जो इमोशंस है, जो मुद्दे उनके दिल से जुड़ा हुआ है मुद्दे हैं, उन पे भी छत्तीसगढ़ काम कर रही है। छत्तीसगढ़ इज ए स्मॉल स्टेट having a population of around 2.5 crores, but it is a diverse population. For example, अगर हम यहाँ पे छठ सेलिब्रेट कराएं फ्रॉम बिहार, तो मुझे छठ यहाँ बहुत बड़े पैमाने पे होते हैं और छठ में यहाँ की छुट्टी है। अगर हम यहाँ पर, if Dr. Shashi Tharoor wants to celebrate Onam here, he can proudly celebrate in Nandgaon, which has a huge Malayali population. So as every part में छत्तीसगढ़ में आप चले जाएं, हर एक राज्य का त्योहार है, हर एक बोली बोली जाती है, तेलुगु से लेके मलयालम से लेकर के पूरा भिलाईगढ़ से लेकर के ये पूरा है। So Chhattisgarh is also a case of celebrating diversity and respecting each other's culture. तो हम एक और जहां हमारी सरकार जो छत्तीसगढ़ की जनता है उसके इश्यूज यानी उसके कल्चर को, संस्कृति को, भाषा को, बोली को, खान पान, रहन सहन, पहनावा, बोली, गाना, डांस, एवरीथिंग दैट रिलेट्स टू द कल्चर ऑफ दिस छत्तीसगढ़ विच इज अ डाइवर्स कल्चर, हम सभी को बैलेंस करके उसको बढ़ा रहे हैं, उसको आगे डॉक्यूमेंट करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। उसको सभी को, हमको ये लगे कि छत्तीसगढ़ में जो भी यहाँ पे लोग रहते हैं उसको पूरी तरह से आज़ादी है, उसके क्या धर्म है, उसके क्या भाषा है, उसकी क्या बोली है, उसके क्या खान पान है, क्या उसके त्योहार हैं, दे कैन वेरी प्राउडली सेलिब्रेट, और सब लोग मिलकर के हम ये छत्तीसगढ़ में सेलिब्रेट कर रहे हैं। फॉर एग्जाम्पल अभी देख लीजिएगा, छत्तीसगढ़ में जब भारतीय जनता पार्टी के सरकार में जब 15 साल वहां उनकी सरकार थी, इट वॉज नॉट सो कूल टू हैव बोरेबासी, है ना। लोग बोरेबासी वॉज छत्तीसगढ़ का खाना व्यंजन। जैसे मैं अगर बिहार में लिट्टी चोखा अगर मैं कूली नहीं खा पाऊं, इट्स नॉट, if I am Bihar, if it's not so cool to have litti choka for me, so was in the case of Chhattisgarh here in Borewasi. So the aspiration of Chhattisgarh culture, Sanskriti is being given due weightage, उसको आगे बढ़ाया जा रहा है, so that every Chhattisgarhia can feel proud of it. At the same time, people with other food habits, other language are equally, जैसे इन्होंने कहा, छठ में होली, छठ में हमारा यहाँ पे एक उत्तर भारत के बहुत सारे जनसंख्या है जो यहाँ रहते हैं, उस दिन छठ की छुट्टी है, सब लोग, पूरी सरकार जाती है, छठ सेलिब्रेट करते हैं, ओणम सेलिब्रेट करते हैं, सब तरह के त्योहार, ईद सेलिब्रेट किया जाता है, दिवाली, होली, रामनवमी, सब तरह के यहाँ पे त्योहार को हम लोग पूरी सरकार और सभी नेता पार्टी सब लोग हम लोग सेलिब्रेट करते हैं। तो जो सस्टेनेबल कम्युनिटीज का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है, अदर देन इकोनॉमिक्स, जो एक पार्ट है जो हम लोग यहाँ पे छत्तीसगढ़ में बहुत अच्छे तरह से ध्यान दे रहे हैं कि उसके इमोशनल पार्ट ऑफ द कम्युनिटीज का जो डेवलपमेंट है उसको भी अच्छे से ध्यान रख रहे हैं। दूसरा जो होता है कि रिप्रेजेंटेशन पार्ट ऑफ इट, कि उनका जो पॉलिसी मेकिंग में, डिसीजन मेकिंग में जो इन तमाम कम्युनिटीज का से हो, उनके भी व्यूज लिए जाए। दैट इज ऑल्सो अक्रॉस पॉलिसी मेकिंग में हम उसको सुनिश्चित करते हैं। थोड़ा सा मैं, चूंकि ये ऑल इंडिया प्रोफेशनल कांग्रेस इज ऑल्सो पार्ट ऑफ द लार्जर कांग्रेस फैमिली, तो यहाँ पे ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल मॉडल है एक जो हम लोग को थोड़ा यहाँ पे डिस्कस करना चाहिए, क्योंकि समवेयर डाउन द लाइन विद 137-year-old पार्टी नीड्स ऑल्सो सम सॉर्ट ऑफ ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल sort of evaluation or kind of a model to develop to fight this BJP. तो उसमें छत्तीसगढ़ में पीसीसी से लेकर के बूथ तक, यानी जो लेयर अभी उदयपुर चिंतन शिविर में मंडल का एक यूनिट जो ब्लॉक के बाद इंट्रोड्यूस किया गया था, छत्तीसगढ़ में हमारा टीम छत्तीसगढ़ ने पहले से ही वो मंडल जो यूनिट है वो पहले से यहाँ एग्जिस्ट करती है। सो वी हैव अ रोबस्ट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन विच इज फंक्शनल, विच इज ऑपरेशनल, ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल कंप्लीटनेस है, यानी नॉट ओनली ऑन पेपर बट इट्स फंक्शनल। आई एम टेलिंग यू कि आज कल 5 तारीख को देयर आर 306 ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल ब्लॉक्स। आप कहेंगे तो आई मीन वी हैव चेक्ड मेनी ए टाइम्स, 90% ऑफ द ब्लॉक्स में ये हमारा फंक्शंस होगा, कोई ना कोई अच्छे तरीके से किए जा रहे हैं। सो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का जो मॉडल है वो कंस्ट्रक्टिव प्रोग्राम्स भी हम लोग करते हैं, एजुटेशनल भी करते हैं। तो पीसीसी से लेके हर एक रेगुलर मीटिंग होता है, पीसीसी, डीसीसी, बीसीसी, मंडल एंड बूथ कमेटी। अभी तक हम लोगों का बूथ कमेटी हो गया, इलेक्शंस के प्रिपेयर्डनेस में वी हैड 90 बूथ कमिटीज मीटिंग्स इन ऑल द असेंबलीज। सो एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का भी मॉडल जो हम लोग 5K से, एंड लेट मी ऑल्सो रिमाइंड कि छत्तीसगढ़ एक पहला ऐसा राज्य होगा जहां हम लोग हर एक जिले में कांग्रेस पार्टी का एक कार्यालय बन रहा है। अब एवरी डिस्ट्रिक्ट विल हैव एक हमारा बना है हेडक्वार्टर्स, जहां आप देखे होंगे रायपुर में, विच इज टोटली मॉडर्न तरीके से, हमें सब टेक्नोलॉजी के साथ सब तरीके से जहां आप मीटिंग कर सकते हैं, अच्छे से मीटिंग कर सकते हैं, उसी तरह से उसी पैटर्न पे एक डिजाइन से हम सभी जिले में हमारा राजीव गांधी कांग्रेस भवन बन रहा है। एंड द आइडिया इज टू गो टिल ब्लॉक लेवल। सो अभी हम लोग जिले लेवल पे सब चीज कर रहे हैं। हमारे पास कार्यक्रम, कहानी, कार्यालय, कार्यशाला, एंड वन मोर इंपॉर्टेंट, द डाइवर्सिटी, द सोशल डाइवर्सिटी ऑफ छत्तीसगढ़ इज टोटली रिप्रेजेंटेड फ्रॉम टॉप टू बॉटम, यानी पीसीसी लेवल से लेके बूथ लेवल तक हमारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस में आपको रीजनल डाइवर्सिटी, कास्ट डाइवर्सिटी, अर्बन एंड रूरल डाइवर्सिटी, जेंडर डाइवर्सिटी, इस सब का ख्याल रखते हुए हम लोग ये मॉडल बनाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं।
What Chandan Yadav was saying, like all the policies are made here looking after economical, ecological, human, emotional things of the Chhattisgarh people, you know, so the policies are being accordingly. My colleague Pratyush Bharadwaj also want to ask a question. Singhdir Saab.
Welcome the distinguished dais. Sir, you were talking about, you wanted to speak about Narwa Garwa Gurwa Bari, especially since it's the vision of Honorable CM Bhupesh Baghel ji, wherein he is trying to integrate the rural economy and making them self-sustainable. So would like you to take that forward, sir.
And also about Manrega, how effective it is. Yes.
NGGB, because initially I was told I was to talk on that, but then today's topic became a little different, more general. So I had that in mind. NGGB, it's interesting you asked me how it came up. When we were preparing the manifesto, that was the time when cow vigilantism was peaking in the country. And the issue of what to do with cattle who have now aged. Earlier they were being sold. Now the trade in cattle had almost come to a standstill. So what do you do with those cattle? We started from there. We visited people who had gaushalas and at various places in Chhattisgarh. And from there we started cattle, let us say a place where cattle could be pended. We could keep the cattle. And with that, there were other associate issues. One was water conservation. One was organic manure and its use. So what is NGGB? Narwa, water conservation. Garwa, cattle. Ghurwa in Chhattisgarh is organic manure. And Badi is where we use it in our field. So these four different aspects which we had put into the manifesto. There, Vinod Verma ji was also with us at that time. He is not on the panel today. So when we were making the manifesto, we clubbed these into NGGB, and our CM is taking it forward in a very committed and strong manner. What we are doing here, for example, how many cattle farmers have been benefited? 2,11,000. How many self-help groups are involved? 84,000. How many Gauthans have been sanctioned? We have 11,658 panchayats. Of those, 10,624 have been sanctioned. 8,408 have been made. 3,089 are self-reliant now. Sustainable was one aspect. So where government is subsidizing or giving each Gauthan Samiti 10,000 rupees a month to give to the Gaupalak, etc. 10,000 rupees a month is being given to these committees. All these committees, every one of these committees is getting that. And the concept initially was that they should become self-reliant, not dependent on the government. Then they will be sustainable. So how many have we been able to make self-reliant? 3,089. And then cow dung came from there. This was not part of the manifesto. So monetizing cow dung, I don't think this was thought about earlier or done anywhere in the country. So at 2 rupees a kg, we decided as to how much, what would be the dry compost value we would be getting. You purchase wet cow dung, 1 kg of cow dung or 10 kgs of cow dung would convert to how much of fertilizer? Then you price it. So we said, let's start with 2 rupees for cow dung. We are maintaining 2 rupees per cow dung. And how much have we purchased? 77 lakh quintals. 77 lakh quintals of cow dung has been purchased, and an amount of 153 crores have been given to the people. 1,02,000 compost pits have been made. 1,37,000 landless persons have been benefited. 58 crore rupees have gone to self-help groups after the selling of the compost. This is just the model, some figures I had prepared. Gauthan Samiti, 10,000 rupees I told you is being given to them. 89 crore rupees have been given to these Gauthan committees to date. It will continue. And different activities which are taking place there. Now the Chief Minister has conceptualized that, let us say randomly, at least 5 activities in the Gauthan. You have land which is vacant, which is not used, and if you can put in cottage industries, we've given it industrial, the name is industrial park. We're not talking of big industries, so small industries, 5 everywhere. So the self-help groups again who are involved in looking after the Gauthan, if they don't get money, it's not going to run. You need to give them money. So where are they going to get money to maintain the Gauthan? So give them that activity. So 5 activities at least in each. RIPA is the name that we have given to this Rural Industrial Park. Then Adhosanrachna Vikas mein, how much has been spent in the infrastructure? 732 crores has been spent on this infrastructure so far. So this is the seriousness with what started at a time when cow vigilantism was at a peak. Stray cattle who were coming into the fields and destroying the crop, off-season crops, particularly when cattle are left loose. And to try and have a place for them, there are challenges. There are challenges which we have to meet out. We have to see that the model is sustainable. What you deliver as compost should be able to be sold, and it can be maintained. And my friend also mentioned cow urine. That is also being looked into how we can build it up in a sustainable way. Manrega, Chhattisgarh has about 36 lakh card holders. We have 200 days of Manrega. 100 is guaranteed in the Act. 50 is for Forest Right Act dwellers, and 50 days is supplemented by the government of Chhattisgarh. So families, our target is to see as many as possible families, they cross 100 days. We are parochial in that sense कि केंद्र सरकार का पैसा ये तो पूरा ले लो पहले, राज बजट का 50 हम बाद में देंगे, केंद्र सरकार का 100 दिन का ले लो, फिर केंद्र सरकार का 50 दिन का FRA वाला ले लो, फिर हम राज्य सरकार वाला 50 दिन भी लगाएंगे. So it has a provision for 200 days. And Manrega, which was talked about by our Prime Minister as a nail in the coffin of the NDA.
Yeah.
During Corona times, amongst the highest, Rajasthan took over. You have a larger population. Chhattisgarh had given employment to the largest number of people.
Fantastic,
Who were returning back,
wonderful.
At the time of Corona pandemic. And then convergence is a part of Narega. You wanted to know how the families are being. We tried for agriculture. Government of India is not agreeing. So of the 268 odd activities that can be taken under Manrega, lot of projects, including MLA fund, we are converging it with Manrega so that labor component can be paid by Manrega, and it trickles down, goes down to the tribal community. And the representation of women in Manrega we follow closely. The representation of each community we follow closely, so that the population of that community is getting the benefit of Manrega throughout Chhattisgarh.
Thank you very much. Thank you for great insight. I would like to thank all the panel members for their time. If we conclude the session, India has the opportunity to save money, make money, and do good by adopting the principles of sustainable communities. And there's a great future, and we should always remember what Mahatma Gandhi said. The world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. So पृथ्वी के पास हमारी जरूरत के लिए पर्याप्त साधन है, लेकिन लालच के लिए नहीं. तो हमको जरूरी है कि ये सस्टेनेबल कम्युनिटीज जो हैं उनके ऊपर ध्यान देना पड़ेगा. और थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर दिस सेशन.
Thank you very much. May I requested panelists to please remain on the stage. We have a small token of appreciation to give to you. May I invite our Honorable Chairman, Deputy Chairman, RC East. May I invite Honorable Minister Tekamji, Minister of Schools. May I invite Captain Uttam Kumarji to please come up on stage.
I hope you don't have to. We will blow your thank you.
There's one, Rajji, but अच्छा बोले, strong. Yes, lot of passion.
पैशन तो चाहिए पॉलिटिक्स में।
सलमान
This one is for Uttam, sir. This is for Uttam, sir. This is for Tekam. I did not we didn't get an opportunity to talk about, have a discussion, but I'm wondering how much monthly fiscal impact all of this spending has.
Sir, this side. Respected colleagues, we now have lunch service for you, which you can find on the other side over there. The chairman and national executive will be there for lunch along with our esteemed panelists. After that, we have a lunch for about half an hour, so please come back here sharp by 2:45.
Acha. So Uttam Kumar Reddy is a former Indian Air Force pilot, former aide to the President of India and Rashtrapati Bhavan, who then went on to become the PCC President of Telangana and is now a Member of Parliament in the Lok Sabha. So you can imagine he comes to politics with a very unusual background. Tell us the story, Uttam. What happened? How did you manage to, you must have had a young ambition as a child, as a growing up boy, to become an Indian Air Force pilot. And then what happened?
Thank you, Shashi Tharoor. Firstly, I must compliment you on the way you have built the All India Professional Congress, the way you conceptualized it and built it for various states. As a PCC president, as an MLA, as a minister, as an MP, I have done my best to promote professional congress in Telangana. And I've always felt that this was a need of the hour, that Congress enrolls as many professionals as possible, share our ideology, promote the Congress party among professionals. No, I'll come to that a little later. But I think you've done an amazing job and I must compliment on it.
Thank you.
And on your 5th anniversary.
Wouldn't be possible without the team
I
here.
think let's all give a hand for Shashi Tharoor ji, because on the 5th anniversary, I'm so impressed that people have come from across the country in reasonable numbers to a place like Raipur for the 5th anniversary for this 2-day session. And I think it's all due to his charisma and his stellar leadership and his good organization. I wish to first congratulate Shashi ji on the wonderful job he's done for Professional Congress. Now,
The credit goes to all of them, really. They're the ones who made it possible. But thank you.
And to all of you, because I've met many of you from yesterday evening to now, and you come from very far off places and spared your valuable time, taken the effort to travel all the way and participate in this 2-day event. My compliments and best wishes to all of you. Now, just going back to what Shashi was saying, actually, after the 1971 war, I don't know, for many of you, you must have been either very young or not born. In many schools across the country, and in my school, I was from a Kendriya Vidyalaya in BHL, where my father was working. We had a photo exhibition of the 71 war, and we had the war heroes come in the military uniform and give lectures, especially those who belong to our state, about the war and its experiences and the Indo-Pak War, which India won decisively in 1971. And I think a number of us were very influenced by that lecture and those uniforms and those photo exhibitions. So then we always thought, this is a great way to lead a life. I mean, such a patriotic way and to lay down life for the country, etc. So a few years later, there was an All India competitive exam, the UPSC exam for National Defence Academy. And I'm not sure how it is now, but it was a very competitive exam then. And several of us wrote together that exam. And then we went to NDA. That time, among the persons who wrote the exam with me and went to NDA together is Vivek Chaudhary, who's present Chief of the Air Force.
So after NDA, we went through I was selected for the Air Force. We joined NDA at the age of 16. And then it was only 10th class, sir. Not even the 11th, just the 10th class. And 3 years in NDA, couple of years in various Air Force academies, and then I was picked up. It was quite a prestigious thing to directly fly the MiG-21s, which were a fairly relatively new aircraft then. And
Which year was this? Which year?
The year 81. Sir.
Oh, wow.
And we were posted to Tezpur. Tezpur's significance was that in the 1962 war, the Chinese came up to Tezpur. So India decided to build a air base there with fighters, and it was a MiG-21 base, and we as very young pilot officers and flying officers were posted to Tezpur. After a year, then a few of us were picked up to fly MiG-23 MFs, which was the latest aircraft in the world then. The most, for a layman, what you understand how sophisticated the aircraft was that aircraft could fly at 2.5 times the speed of sound.
Wow.
2.5 times the speed of sound. And as your speed increases, your wings sweep back. You take off and land at a particular speed with the wings swept forward. After you get airborne, then you take the aircraft to a certain intermediate stage, the wings. And then when you hit supersonic speeds, the wings would go fully back. It's almost like sitting in a rocket. So I was in MiG-23 MFs, and we did a number of operations. I was in Siachen Glacier Air Defense at that time. And I was also on the ground in Siachen Glacier. For those of you who are not familiar, so the temperature there is minus 40 degrees. Minus 40 degrees. So more people die of frostbite than of bullet wounds. And I had a fairly distinguished service there, and then briefly in IPKF in Sri Lanka. And then we were, nowadays, this present government makes a lot of hangama about surgical strikes. Those days it was done in a very secretive way. We never spoke about it then. We never speak about it now.
That's right.
But there were a number of, very sensitive missions as fighter pilots, which we did. So during one of those dry runs close to the line of control, I was in a single-engined, single-pilot MiG-23 MF, and the aircraft exploded in the air.
Oh my!
So still nobody knows why it exploded, engine failure or shot or anything. So there's no official version to it. The aircraft just exploded in the air, sir. Sitting
Could
in the
it have been
aircraft,
sabotage? Could somebody have planted something on the plane?
nobody can find it because the debris was spread over a few hundred kilometers, and nobody could find any reasons. But I was sitting in the aircraft; it just exploded around me. Okay, sir. Anyway, you must have seen in Top Gun and movies like that. Then I ejected from the MiG-23, had a miraculous escape, and survived with several spinal fractures and knee fractured and half burnt and all.
Where did you land? On ground or water? Or?
Landed on the ground, sir, close to the line of control on the Indian side, but very, very severely injured. And then, of course, I was in the hospital for about 6 months and recovered. Got back to flying. But what happens is in a fighter flying, if you, within a short span, if you have to eject again, your spine may not take it. So to give me a peace posting, I was posted to the office of the President of India. And I was posted as an ADC to President R. Venkatraman. Then I continued as what is called the Comptroller of President's House. So I was a senior aide and comptroller with two presidents, President R. Venkatraman and President Shankar Dayal Sharma. I was one of the longest serving officers in the president's office. And I think in an act of madness, I resigned from the Rashtrapati Bhavan after being permanently absorbed and came and joined the Congress party. In 94, then I got into serious grassroots politics. In 94, I contested as an MLA. I lost. And I can tell you what it is to be in an opposition party and when you lose. And politics at the grassroots level is fairly brutal. I mean, police cases, harassment, being framed in wrong things, all that. Anyway, we endured it, and 99 I won as an MLA. Then I won in 2004, 2009, 2014, 2018, 5 times as an MLA, and 2019 as an MP. In between, I was also a cabinet minister in combined Andhra Pradesh. Then I was the PCC president for Telangana state for 6.5 years. And I've been a great admirer of Dr. Shashi Tharoor. He's probably not just in the Congress party, cutting across this spectrum of political parties in India today, one of the most charismatic and articulate, great writer. And I think it's a great pleasure and a privilege to be with you, sir.
Thank you, Uttam. I really enjoyed our various interactions over the years when I had meetings of AIPC in Hyderabad. It was a rare privilege that the PCC president would come, attend, speak, and give us and show us his full support. And I'm very pleased that the long-term consequence of that is that his wife is now an AIPC secretary in Telangana.
My
And
wife,
sitting
she's an architect and she's also an MLA.
So she is the principal attendee here, and he is only the trailing spouse. But let me just say, Uttam, did you find in all these things you were doing that your professional background and training, the discipline of the NDA, the 3 years of education there, all of that, did the professionalism and in your earlier career impact your work as a politician at all, for good or for bad? Did some things work? Were there some things that didn't match?
I think, so we come from one of the most disciplined organizations to one of the less disciplined organizations, the Congress Party. I mean, I wouldn't say anything, but I think what stood me in good stead was, of course, see, we went through fairly tough postings in the Air Force on the China border, on the Pakistan border, and I think once I decided that, okay, I'm here to stay, so we would work very hard. And in politics, I'm just not saying in Congress Party only, in politics, somehow in India today, merit alone is not a consideration, which we all see in real politics, in elections, and in our various interactions. So we have to endure all that and just keep working hard and hope that God is on our side.
Fair point. I mean, you've already heard 3 or 4 interesting warnings for all of you professionals who are interested in coming into politics. And the other day, a lot of people raised their hands. You already heard that discipline doesn't go very far, merit doesn't go very far, that it's very hard work and that you have to slog and be prepared. And there's a lot of unjust cases and other kinds of harassment levied at you. So if you still want to raise your hands when people ask you, there you are, they still want to fight in politics, please do. I do want to say, though, that Uttam is somebody who's really been through some tough times. And, there's a saying that what doesn't kill you will only make you stronger. And he's come out of his various experiences as a very, very strong person. And in many ways, that's been the experience of some of us who've come into politics, not quite prepared for the Agni Parikshas to follow. And it has to toughen us. Either it toughens you or you essentially get out of the business, because there is no real way of being able to survive in this profession without that. Uttam, I just want to say, as a PCC president, did you find very many professionals interested in joining politics, and did you find them useful? Were you able to attract professionals more to your PCC and to the work of the party, or less?
Very less, very less. See, somehow real professionals, they all want to be armchair critics. They want to, criticize everything. They want to, I don't know how rest of you feel, but I think politician is a bad word in India today. Everybody wants to come to a politician for some favor or the other, but in society as such, the image of a politician has come down. So good professionals tend to keep away, which is unfortunate. I used to tell when I used to contest as an MLA, so, when the Indian Medical Association of doctors or the bar association advocates used to call me either for some work of theirs or, generally for some program or function. I should tell them, and I repeat it now. See, you people will you'll criticize us, you'll say politicians are corrupt, politicians are this, but you don't take part. And for example, I as a local MLA do so much of work for you. Many of you don't even come to vote, leave alone participate in active politics. You don't even come on the voting day. But anyway, steadily over the years, it has increased. But what I can tell you, sir, is that we should aggressively, because I like the way you and your zonal, I think all your zonal coordinators, whether it is Zarita or Mr. Soz or I think Geeta Reddy and I think it was Milind Deora earlier. I think very qualified and very dynamic people, and your state presidents also, I see them working very hard. But I think, you should focus on numbers. How, I think when you discuss with your state presidents, how can we increase the numbers? It's not easy. To motivate people to come and, work, join Congress party is not easy. But I think basic AAPC focus on a 5th anniversary, I can say as your well-wisher, is to focus on your numbers. How to, make greater numbers, how to spread out in the districts, in smaller towns, etc. My own experience was, as a PCC president, many professionals are not straightforward wanting to come. And I must tell you also the disadvantage we face. See, we are All India Professional Congress, a wing of the Indian National Congress. But I must say that somehow the BJP is projecting themselves as a more nationalistic and more patriotic party than we are. There is something that is missing in our narrative, sir. This is ridiculous. We are the people who got freedom to this country. It is the Gandhi family which has sacrificed the most. But when you see the narrative of the BJP, whether it is in Lok Sabha, I see it in Parliament all the time and outside the Parliament. One is, I think AAPC one is enroll more members. I didn't have any, I tried hard, but I think we need to work hard on that. Second is, the AAPC must also build that the Congress is very nationalistic and patriotic. Yeah. I think that's a line we must persistently take, because probably the BJP is taking that line much more stronger than we are. For example, sir, recently I was watching, whether it is the December some date for the celebrating the Indo-Pak victory or the Kargil war or anything else, I found the BJP celebrating these occasions, and our celebrations were less muted, or I would say less publicized. So as professional Congress, that's one thought for you, sir, to keep in mind that we need to improve our
How
image.
many of our chapters actually marked Kargil Vijay Divas? Did any of you have an event? Yes? Okay, there are a few hands, so at least we did something. But clearly not everyone, and that's something that we should be conscious of. I can take 1 or 2 questions maximum if anyone has.
No, I think
questions
we should
from
all hear Dr. Shashi Tharoor. So you must tell us your background, your professional background.
Okay, I've got one hand up for you already, Uttam. Very briefly, I actually had not only a sort of a conventional school and college education, but as I mentioned yesterday in some other context, I was from the kind of background where parents said that if you're good at taking exams and you're doing well, go off and do a real job. Politics is for those people who fail the exams. That was the usual attitude, and that was essentially what so even though I did run for the presidency of my college union at St. Stephen's College, that was a non-political position. We didn't have any NSUI and ABVP and SFI and so on. It was an election on college issues fought amongst college students. But subsequently, I found that in all my working life at the United Nations, before that as a graduate student in America, that somehow people wanted me to take responsibility and to lead. So, for example, I was elected a student representative at the American school. I was at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and placed on the admissions committee, which is very unusual for a foreign student. Similarly, when my organization, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, held the first election amongst all the staff worldwide for their staff representative, I got the highest votes and I became the leader of the staff of the UN. So there was always something that people wanted me to do or saw in me that kept me thinking about being a representative voice, speaking for people, trying to understand and articulate their problems. But I continued having a full-time profession. I worked at the UN for just 1 month shy of 29 years. But then, as you all know, I was India's candidate to succeed Kofi Annan as Secretary General. I lost. I had 2 votes less than Mr. Ban Ki-moon, but one of them was a veto of a permanent member, the United States. So that was that. And I came back to India, and after about a year and a bit of dabbling in the private sector, particularly looking at investments in my home state, I was very pleasantly surprised to be invited to contest in the elections of 2009. And I say pleasantly surprised because I have no political pedigree. Nobody in my family is in politics. I have, or was in politics at that time, certainly not in any position of consequence. I have 2 relatives who were in their respective panchayats, but otherwise literally nothing. And when I was asked, I took on the challenge readily, largely because I didn't know what the heck I was getting into. I had never even seen an election up close because I left India at the age of 19 at a time when voting was only permitted from the age of 21. So I had never even voted. I had never seen any of this process. And you can imagine that that the greatest shock of my life was not merely walking into a minefield in the Yugoslav Civil War or being sniped at in Sarajevo in Bosnia, all of which were part of my experiences. The greatest shock was actually campaigning in my first election. And that too with people organizing the program in the hope of driving me out of politics. So, you know, they would put a totally unrealistic program, sort of where I would start at 6 a.m. and officially end only at 11, but in practice, by 7 p.m., I would have reached what they claimed I could reach at 12. And so it was literally, there were some days when I used to be awake 23 hours a day campaigning. And when you had to switch off the mic at 10 o'clock, doesn't matter, they said, speak without a mic. And I was continuing going around, so people standing by candlelight, listening to my speeches. Somehow or the other, I survived and won. But the truth is that, unlike Uttam, I would say that I do think that some of my professional qualities may have actually helped in my work, because I was able to understand fairly quickly some of the key issues I had no prior experience of, and I tried to solve them in a professional way. We had a highway that had been logjam for 40 years. No MP, including 2 former chief ministers who had been MP for my constituency, had been able to solve it. But by diligent working, by persistently harassing our highway ministers of the day, who happened to be, of course, UPA, because UPA came to power in my first term, I was able to get that particular highway approved, included in the budget, and I made sure that the first checks to buy the land changed hands just before the 2014 election. I knew that if that didn't happen, that once the highway started getting built, the new government would claim all the credit. So I want to make sure that the voters understood who had got them this project. And indeed, that was a huge transformative thing, because it was a highway that was going to cut through 3 of the 7 MLA constituencies in my seat, and people knew it was going to transform their lives. That sort of thing. There are half a dozen examples I won't bore you with. I found, for example, that I had a number of constituents demanding stops of trains that weren't stopping their constituencies. And having gone to a place like St. Stephen's College, I found that the chairman of the railway board was a senior of mine at college. So I could, call him in a way that perhaps another MP couldn't. And I got a stop that people have been agitating for 27 years. So all of those professional sort of connections or whatever did help in advancing some of the development goals, some of the implementation that politicians need to get done in order to show their constituents that politics can usefully change their lives. And that would be my answer, my short answer. You can have a 1-hour version later if you want of Uttam's question. We'll really have to cut the short. There was a lady there with a question. Go ahead.
We can only take one question.
One
so we've got
question. I
state
know.
leaders
We've got the state presidents are waiting for their turn. Go ahead, ma'am. Huh?
So,
no better person to advise you on that one, Uttam. He's been on both sides. of the equation.
See, I think if you're passionate about it, get into it, continue the work you're doing, and get into the mainstream party. You belong to whichever municipality or town or village or wherever. Start working there, and I'm sure, of course, my earlier answer may have been a bit cynical, but I think somebody qualified and passionate and working hard, there'll always be a space. I think just continue to participate in all the political activity and whatever else you're doing now. I'm sure there'll be a future. There'll be a good future.
On that note, that somewhat optimistic note, Mr. Panikkar, we really are in trouble with our time. Yeah. Okay, sir. I think we've taken note of that. And I think
I'll reply to you in 10 seconds. Congress party as a whole and me as an ex-serviceman, we think the Agnipath is a bad idea in every way. And what you're saying is a very relevant point. And I also think it is bad for the national security. Recently, just 2 days back, we had a discussion with some retired army chiefs. Some NGO had organized a roundtable conference. The government is not able to answer why have they gone for it. There is no answer. I think it's bad for it. Hopefully, if we come to government in 2024, we should reverse it.
Uttam, I think it's very clear they've done it purely to save money on the
Yes.
pensions. Nothing
There is
else.
no other reasons.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I've got 2 warnings from my team that the next panel, which is all the states presidents, is massively late and some of the presidents have fights to catch. So let me on your behalf thank Uttam Kumar Reddy for a very enlightening session. Thank you very much, Uttam. And Zarita, please come up on stage and all the president's chairs will follow. Come.
And I wish to thank Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Alim, and all the AAPC guys for inviting us and for your wonderful hospitality. Thank you very much and all the best to you.
Somebody, I'm coming on that back.
Can I call all state presidents, please come on stage? While the state presidents are coming and we're arranging their seats, I would like to invite my good friend, the president of AIPC Haryana, Vijay Dhillon, to share something special with you.